I will never forget that night. Not a single detail has left my memory, even after decades. I was 12 years old and I had just given birth to my baby. My body ached in ways I didn't know a body could ache, and yet the moment I held him, I felt a love so deep it terrified me. His tiny cries filled the room, but the sound of my father and Bobby moving outside the door was far worse. They were exchanging a look, a silent communication that sent ice through my veins. In that brief glance, I understood. Something terrible was about to happen. Then my father turned to me with a face I had never seen before, hard, cold, commanding. "Put on some clothes and come with us," he said. I tried to stand, but my legs were weak from childbirth. What are you going to do with him?" I asked, my voice shaking. They ignored me. There was only one rule that night: obey. I knew if I resisted, even for a second, my baby would pay the price. I managed to pull an old dress over my blood-stained nightgown. My hands shook so violently I could hardly fasten it. Every step was agony. My father carried my baby carelessly like a bundle of rags, and Bobby followed behind, his eyes sharp and filled with menace. The night was dark, the moon barely lit the earth. The only sounds were my son's desperate cries and the crunch of our steps on the dirt. Dogs barked in the distance, but no one turned on their lights. The world seemed asleep while my life was falling apart. They led me to the back of the property, a vacant lot I had always feared. Nothing grew there: broken glass, weeds taller than me, trash piled everywhere. When I realized where they were taking me, I froze. My heart raced as I begged, screamed, and pleaded. "No, Dad, please don't do this." But my cries didn't matter. They dragged me forward until we reached the middle of the lot. My father held the baby out to me. "Here," he said, his voice icy. "Leave him here and let's go." My heart shattered. I ran to him, but Bobby's hands grabbed my arms, squeezing so hard I thought he would break me. "You will do it," he hissed. "If you don't do it the easy way, you'll do it the hard way, and you know what that means." I was weak, terrified, and alone. A 12-year-old girl faced with a choice between her body's weakness and her heart's strength. My hands trembled as I placed my baby on the ground. He cried, reaching for me with tiny hands, but I couldn't fight. I fainted shortly after, wishing I could disappear with him. When I woke, I was back in my bed, sheets blood-stained, and the nightmare was real. I ran to the vacant lot, digging through the trash, calling his name. But he was gone. My baby, my son, taken from me. 20 years of guilt and torment began that day. Every night I asked myself, did he survive? Did someone care for him? Did he wonder who I was? I lived in that shack, working from dawn to dusk to feed myself and them, my father and Bobby, who spent every penny of my earnings on drink, gambling, and cruelty. They humiliated me constantly, reminding me of the day I abandoned my son, as if I had chosen to. Yet through every insult, every blow, every lonely night, a tiny ember of hope survived. Even in the darkest nights, I would sometimes imagine him alive, grown, wondering about me. And little did I know, that ember of hope would one day ignite into a fire so strong that it would change everything. For 20 years, I lived in that small, decaying shack, and every day felt like a repetition of the nightmare from the night I lost my son. My body aged, but my heart never healed. I carried the weight of that loss like a stone pressed into my chest. I became a ghost in my own life, invisible to the world, existing only to serve the two men who called themselves my family. My father, Gerald, had grown older, sourer, and more bitter with each passing year. His back was hunched from labor and the years of drinking, his hair white, his cough persistent, but his cruelty never left him. Bobby, my brother, had turned into a man I could hardly recognize. Fat, lazy, perpetually drunk, a shadow of the boy who had once threatened me with his grip. Every day I woke before the sun. By 4 in the morning, I was already outside, washing, scrubbing, and preparing goods to sell in the downtown market. By midday, my hands were raw, my back a constant ache, my spirit worn thin. Every penny I earned went straight into their hands: food, whiskey, debts I had no say in. There was no relief, no respite, and always, always, the reminder of that night lingered. "Remember the bastard you brought here?" they would say whenever I dared to ask for a small favor or an extra coin. It was as if they believed I had chosen to leave my son in that lot of trash, as if the most horrific act of my life was something I had committed for convenience. And yet, despite the years of humiliation, I never stopped thinking of him. Every night I imagined what he might look like: dark eyes like mine, a shy smile, a small, fragile boy growing up somewhere, wondering about his mother. I imagined him learning to read, taking his first steps, celebrating birthdays. I imagined him surviving somehow against all odds, and I clung to that vision as if it were a lifeline. There were moments when despair threatened to swallow me whole, nights when I cried in the darkness, asking God if he was alive, if anyone had cared for him, if justice would ever come. Sometimes I thought the world was too cruel, that no one could survive such a beginning, and that I would never see him again. Other times I caught myself thinking maybe he hated me, that he blamed me for the life he never had. The thought was unbearable. Through those years, Gerald and Bobby continued their own descent. My father drank to forget, complained endlessly, and cursed life like it had wronged him personally. Bobby spent his days in a hammock or in Mr. Wilson's bar, playing cards and drinking away any chance of self-respect. And me, I existed, silent, grinding through my days, hiding my pain behind a mask of obedience. I learned every trick to avoid his drunken hands, every strategy to escape their wrath. I became a master of silence and invisibility, moving through the house like a shadow, waiting for the day I could escape completely. But even amidst the misery, the ember of hope never died. Something inside me whispered that he was out there somewhere, that life hadn't forgotten him, that somehow, someway, the story wasn't finished. And that whisper grew louder the day I first heard about him, Robert, a man asking questions, digging into the past. I didn't know if it was hope or fear that twisted in my stomach that day, but I knew this: my life was about to change. The first time I saw that black car stop outside Mr. Wilson's bar, my heart froze. And when our eyes met, even from across the street, I felt it. The boy I lost all those years ago had grown, and he had come back. But the questions remained, gnawing at me as I carried out my daily tasks. Was it really him? Could it be possible that after 20 long years of silence, he had survived? Or was it just a man with a story that might crush me all over again? Every sound outside made my heart leap. Every stranger on the street made me look twice, wondering if it was him, wondering if my son had finally returned. Those days were a strange mixture of dread and anticipation. Every evening I would sit alone, staring at the vacant lot where I had left him, imagining every detail of his first night after I was forced to abandon him. Did he cry? Did someone take him in? Did he ever think of me? And then, with the first hint of a shadow crossing our threshold, I would stop breathing, my heart hammering. That shadow might be him, my son, come to reclaim what had been lost, come to right the unimaginable wrong of that day. The tension of waiting became unbearable. Yet amidst it all, I realized something. The same love that had refused to let me leave him alone that night had never left me. That love had survived every blow, every humiliation, every night of silent despair. It had grown, hidden beneath layers of suffering, but it was there, alive, ready to rise. And when the day came that I finally faced him, I knew that nothing in the world, neither fear nor pain, nor the cruelty of my father and brother, could stop me from embracing the miracle of seeing him alive. Even after decades of silence, even after the crushing weight of 20 years of guilt, I was not broken. I was waiting, biding my time, clinging to hope. And though the world seemed indifferent, I felt it. A shift in the air, a prelude to the moment that would change everything. Robert, my son, was out there. And soon, the story of that night, the story of the abandoned baby, the story of the suffering mother, would come to its turning point. The morning sun had barely started creeping over the horizon when I heard it, a knock on the door that made my entire body freeze. It wasn't the casual knock of a neighbor asking for a favor or the impatient bang of a delivery man. This knock carried weight. It was deliberate, measured, and I felt it reverberate in my chest as if it had been time to awaken every long-buried memory of that night. My hands trembled as I wiped them on my apron, trying to steady my breathing. My heart pounded with a mixture of fear, hope, and disbelief. Could it really be him? After 20 years, could my son, my little baby left in the vacant lot, be standing at my doorstep? I opened the door slowly, as if even the act of breathing too heavily would make him vanish, and there he was. A man tall, confident, with a presence that seemed to fill the entire yard. His eyes, those eyes, deep, dark, almond-shaped, hauntingly familiar, my breath caught in my throat. I had imagined this moment thousands of times over the years, but nothing could have prepared me for the intensity of reality. That gaze didn't just look at me, it saw through me. Every fear, every regret, every secret longing I had buried for decades seemed to lay bare beneath his stare. And then a small scar, faint but unmistakable, marked the center of his forehead. My heart skipped, then fell, then surged in ways I didn't think possible after all these years. "I'm looking for the truth," he said, his voice deep but calm, carrying a weight that made me shiver. "I need to know what happened to me." Time seemed to stop. The world around me, the rickety shack, the peeling paint, the crooked boards of the fence faded into a blur. I couldn't speak. My tongue felt frozen in my mouth, my knees weak, my hands gripping the doorframe for support. Could this man really be my son? The baby I had been forced to leave behind all those years ago, the child whose cries haunted my nights, whose absence had carved a hollow in my soul that never healed. Bobby, my brother, appeared from the shadows of the porch, his face pale, a mixture of curiosity and something darker, fear. Gerald shuffled behind him, his old body betraying the years of alcohol and anger. Neither of them said a word, but the tension in the air was palpable. They could sense what I already knew in my heart. Robert, stepped closer, and I noticed the strength in his posture, the quiet authority in his every movement. There was no hesitation, no uncertainty, only the undeniable presence of someone who had survived, grown, and thrived despite the cruel circumstances of his beginning. "I've traced everything," he continued, producing a leather folder from his briefcase. "Every clue, every lead, every person who might have seen something. I know where I came from, and I know what happened to me as a baby." My body shook violently. I felt a wave of nausea, but it wasn't just from the shock. It was the culmination of 20 years of grief, 20 years of unanswered questions, 20 years of imagining his fate over and over until it had become a part of me. The baby I had abandoned, the one I had mourned silently every night, was here, grown into a man capable of standing before me and uncovering the truth I had hidden in my heart for so long. He laid out the evidence carefully, with precision that left no room for doubt. Statements from neighbors who remembered a young girl in the house, midwives who recalled a birth, people who had noticed strange comings and goings on that fateful day. Each name, each account, each scrap of paper was a key turning the lock that had kept me trapped in fear and guilt for decades. My father and brother's faces were mirrors of my own shock and terror. For once, they were the ones shrinking, the ones unable to meet my eyes. And then the truth emerged in the most undeniable form. Robert had been found by a kind man, a garbage collector named Mr. Jackson, who had raised him as his own. He had loved him, taught him, encouraged him to study and grow. And now, standing before me, Robert was living proof that love, even when withheld, even when delayed, could survive the harshest of circumstances. I wanted to run to him, to collapse in his arms, to apologize, to beg for forgiveness, to tell him how every day without him had been a nightmare. But I froze, paralyzed by the overwhelming reality of this reunion. My son was no longer the tiny, helpless baby I had held. He was a man, strong, accomplished, commanding, and yet, when his eyes softened and fixed on mine, I saw a spark of the child he once was, the same child I had loved before the world tore us apart. "I know it was never your choice," he said gently, his voice almost breaking the barrier between us. "I know the monsters in your life made you do something no mother should ever have to do. And I understand now." Tears streamed down my face uncontrollably. My entire body trembled with the release of decades of pain, fear, and longing. I had imagined this moment countless times, yet nothing could have captured the overwhelming mixture of relief, joy, and sorrow that coursed through me now. I wanted to scream, to cry, to laugh, to fall to my knees. I had survived 20 years without him, clinging to hope, and now, against all odds, he was here. Bobby tried to intervene, his voice sharp and defensive, but Robert's gaze silenced him instantly. Gerald stammered, but there was no escape, no way to hide the truth any longer. The boy they had tormented, the mother they had abused and controlled, the family they had destroyed, they were finally facing the reckoning that had been coming for 20 years. And I knew in that moment that my suffering, my struggle, my silent endurance had not been in vain. This knock on the door, simple as it might have seemed to the world, had shattered decades of despair. The man standing in front of me was more than just my son. He was a symbol that no darkness lasts forever, that love can survive impossible odds, and that the past, no matter how cruel, can eventually lead to redemption. And as he extended his hand toward me, I knew that my life, as I had known it for 20 years, was about to end, and a new chapter, filled with hope and healing, was about to begin. The moment was tense, almost unbearably so. Robert's eyes stayed fixed on me, gentle and understanding, but his presence alone seemed to cast a shadow over Gerald and Bobby. I had spent years fearing their dominance, their threats, their twisted sense of control, but now the power dynamic had shifted entirely. For the first time, they were vulnerable, exposed in front of the one person they could never intimidate. My son, the son they had helped force me to abandon. Do you remember what you did? Robert's voice cut through the silence like a blade. Calm, deliberate, controlled, not a yell, not a shout, just the weight of authority behind every word. My father's face turned pale, and I saw the flicker of fear that had never existed in his eyes before. My brother fidgeted, his body shrinking as if he could physically disappear from the yard. I had witnessed decades of cruelty, of me being tormented and powerless, but in this moment they were the ones shrinking, and it was intoxicating to see the tables turn. Robert opened the leather folder again and began to lay out the story he had uncovered. Every detail matters, he said. I traced the path of that day, spoke to everyone who remembered, and I verified the facts. I know exactly who was involved and what happened. He spoke with precision, like a surgeon cutting through decades of lies. Every witness, every scrap of evidence, every document he pulled from that folder chipped away at the fortress of lies my father and brother had built around themselves. Bobby tried to interrupt, to defend himself, but Robert's gaze froze him instantly. Do not speak, he said simply, and it was enough. His calm authority was terrifying. Gerald, who had always been loud and domineering, suddenly seemed small and fragile. His hands shook as he tried to take in the folder's contents. The proof was irrefutable. The lies, the intimidation, the abuse, they could no longer shield themselves. And then Robert turned to me. The warmth in his eyes was overwhelming. Mom, he said softly, I know you were forced. I know you had no choice. And I want you to know I forgive you. I felt my knees buckle. 20 years of guilt, shame, and heartbreak pressed down on me like a crushing weight, and yet in that moment his words were a balm. I wanted to scream, to cry, to collapse in his arms, but I managed only to shake and whisper, I never stopped loving you, never, not for a day. He stepped closer, and I could feel the strength of the man he had become. I know, he said simply. I always knew in my heart that you loved me, even when you were forced to leave me. And then came the reckoning for Gerald and Bobby. Robert's tone hardened slightly, but it was still measured. You have two choices, he said. You leave this property and never come back, or I involve the authorities. I've documented everything, the abuse, the abandonment, the mistreatment. You know the consequences. You know what justice will demand. Bobby's face went white and he tried to speak, to bargain, but Robert's gaze silenced him completely. Gerald's hands shook as he clutched his chest, realizing that for once there was no escape from accountability. For decades, they had believed they controlled everything, that I had no power, no voice, no recourse. And now the boy they had destroyed, the child whose life they had altered forever, was standing in front of them, grown, strong, and untouchable. I could hardly breathe. The years of terror, humiliation, and despair were colliding with the reality of Robert's presence. He had not come for revenge in the way I had feared. He had come for justice, for truth, and to reclaim the bond that had been stolen from us. And in his calm authority, I felt a surge of protection I had never known. For the first time in my life, I realized I was no longer alone, no longer at the mercy of my father and brother. Bobby finally moved to speak, his voice trembling. Please don't ruin us. We didn't mean, Robert cut him off with a slight shake of his head. You meant what you did. You knew exactly what you were forcing her to do. And now you will face the consequences of your choices. But this isn't about hatred. This is about correcting wrongs. And with that, the two men slowly gathered their few belongings, their power evaporated completely. Gerald's hands shook as he stuffed his few possessions into a battered suitcase. Bobby followed, defeated and pale. They left quietly, walking down the dirt road as if the earth itself had swallowed their courage. For the first time, the shack, the yard, and even the air felt like a place of liberation for me, not imprisonment. I turned to Robert, tears streaming down my face, my hands reaching for his. How did you find me? How did you even know? I asked, voice trembling, barely able to form words. He smiled softly, a mix of triumph and tenderness. I never stopped looking, Mom. Mr. Jackson always told me that I was meant for more, that someday I would uncover my past. I studied, I asked questions, I followed every lead until the truth was undeniable. And now here I am to make sure you're free from them and to finally meet the mother I always hoped loved me. I could hardly speak, the flood of emotions threatening to overwhelm me. 20 years of pain, sorrow, and longing came crashing into one moment, And yet, even amidst the tears, I felt a deep, overwhelming sense of relief. My son, my child who had been ripped from my arms, was alive, strong, capable. And he had returned not just to find me, but to restore the life that had been stolen from me. And in that instant, the years of torment, the cruel laughter, the endless nights of guilt, they all began to fade. Because Robert, my son, was here, and nothing would ever be the same again. I can still remember every detail of that moment as if it happened yesterday. The way Robert reached for my hand, his fingers warm and firm, the unmistakable weight of presence that only a son could carry after 20 years apart. I felt my knees tremble beneath me, my heart pounding so hard I feared it would burst. It was more than just seeing him. It was realizing that the boy I had abandoned, the one I had wept for every single night, had survived. He was alive, strong, he was real, and he was mine. We didn't speak for several moments. Words seemed useless, inadequate, incapable of carrying the magnitude of what was unfolding. Instead, I held his hands in mine, as if by doing so I could somehow absorb the truth, the proof that he was really here. And Robert squeezed my hands gently, as if assuring me that all the years of sorrow, all the nightmares, all the grief, they were over. The weight of my father and brother's tyranny, the years of abuse, of forced labor, of humiliation, they all felt lighter in that single touch. I can't believe it. I never thought I'd see you, I whispered, my voice cracking with tears, fear, and relief all at once. I thought I had lost you forever. Robert's eyes glistened with tears of his own. Mom, I never stopped hoping, not for a single day. Mr. Jackson told me you loved me, and I always believed it. That love kept me going, even when I didn't understand my past, even when I was scared and alone. For a moment, the air was heavy with silence, the kind of silence that stretches between two hearts finally reunited. Then I noticed the little things, the scar on his forehead, the same almond-shaped eyes I had glimpsed in his newborn face, the familiar tilt of his smile. Every detail, every feature was a reminder that the child I had held, even for a fleeting moment, had endured, had grown, had thrived. He led me gently toward the black car, and my feet hesitated. The old shack, with its crooked walls and peeling wood, had been my entire world for so long. It had been a prison, a place of misery, of endless labor and humiliation, but it had also been the place where I had survived. Could I really leave it behind? Could I really step into a life I had never dared to imagine? Robert seemed to read my thoughts. You don't have to rush, Mom, but it's time you lived the life you deserve. No one will ever hurt you again. As we stepped inside the car, I felt the tension in my body begin to release, as if I had been holding my breath for 20 years and was finally exhaling. The car was modern, sleek, and smelled faintly of leather and polish. I couldn't stop looking at Robert, at the man my son had become. The boy I had lost had transformed into someone extraordinary, intelligent, confident, compassionate, and fiercely protective. And yet in his gaze, I saw the child who had once cried alone in a vacant lot, the one I had longed for with every fiber of my being. On the drive to Jackson, Robert began to share his story. He told me about Mr. Jackson, the man who had found him abandoned, crying among the debris, and had chosen to raise him as his own. I could hardly imagine a man finding a newborn in a trash-strewn lot and deciding to dedicate his life to raising him, but that's exactly what had happened. Robert had been given love, education, guidance, and hope. He had grown up knowing he was wanted, cherished, and capable of greatness, even if he had been robbed of his mother's embrace. I always knew there was a mother out there, Robert said, his voice quiet but full of conviction. I never stopped wondering who you were, what happened to you, if you loved me, if you had been forced to leave me. The thought of him holding on to hope for all those years brought tears to my eyes. All the guilt, all the shame, all the self-recrimination I had carried, it began to dissolve, replaced by awe and gratitude. Somehow, someway, the boy I had abandoned had survived not only physically, but emotionally. He had held on to love, even for the mother who had been powerless to save him. When we arrived at his home in Jackson, I was stunned. The house was large, elegant, and filled with light. Every corner reflected a life of success, of security, of love. Yet, despite its grandeur, the warmth radiating from Robert made it feel like a home rather than a monument. And in that home, I felt an acceptance and embrace that I had never experienced in all the years of my life. Robert's arms were steady as he led me inside. Mom, this is your life now. You've endured enough. You don't have to work, suffer, or fear ever again. I could barely comprehend the reality. My whole life had been spent in survival mode, grinding from dawn to dusk just to keep the two men who had tormented me alive. And now I was free, free to live without fear, without shame, without the constant reminder of what I had lost. I was allowed happiness, allowed love, allowed safety. Over the next few days, I began to learn more about Robert's life, his achievements, his family. He had built a construction company from nothing, employed hundreds, and become a respected man in his community. And yet, he had never stopped searching for me, never stopped longing for the mother who had been forced to leave him. His determination and love humbled me. The boy I had once held in a moment of fleeting warmth had become a man capable of incredible compassion, of understanding, of protecting me in a way I had never known existed. At night, when the lights dimmed and we sat together in the quiet of his home, I could feel the weight of years begin to lift from my shoulders. I realized that my suffering had not been in vain. It had preserved me, had made me resilient, and had somehow guided my son toward the kind of love and justice that would restore both of us. And as I lay down for the first time in decades without fear, I whispered a silent prayer of gratitude for Robert, for Mr. Jackson, for the chance to live again. And in that moment, I understood something fundamental. Life has a way of balancing the scales, of returning what was lost in forms you can scarcely imagine. My child had come back, not as the fragile infant I once held, but as a man strong enough to rewrite the story of my life. And I at last could breathe freely, knowing that our story of pain had transformed into one of redemption, reunion, and unimaginable love. The first days in Robert's home were surreal, almost like stepping into a dream I had never dared to imagine. I remember walking through the halls, running my fingers along the polished wood, feeling the soft carpet beneath my feet, and hearing the faint hum of a life that was orderly, safe, and filled with love. Every room held reminders of his achievements, his careful planning, and his success, yet none of it felt intimidating. Instead, it felt like an embrace, a warm welcome that I had longed for but had never known in my life. I had spent decades cowering in the shadows of my father and brother's cruelty, and now suddenly there was nothing to fear, nothing at all. Robert introduced me to his family slowly, with care, sensing that my heart might still tremble at too much too soon. Claudia, his wife, greeted me with a smile so genuine that it melted away any lingering anxiety. She took my hand in hers and spoke with a kindness I had never heard in my youth. "It's so wonderful to finally meet you, Agnes. You've been loved from afar for so long, and now I hope you can feel that love every day." Her words made my chest ache. After 20 years of loneliness, humiliation, and endless labor, this was the first time someone had spoken to me with the kind of respect and warmth that should have been mine all along. And then there were the children, Robert Jr., Marina, and Daniel. Each of them was a reflection of the father I had lost and the son I had held only once. Robert Jr., with his gentle curiosity and bright eyes, clung to my hand and wanted to know everything about me. Marina, quiet and thoughtful, observed me with a careful gaze that seemed to measure whether I was truly real. And Daniel, the youngest, had an energy and openness that reminded me of a toddler I had once held in my arms but could never protect. In their faces, I saw the pieces of my son scattered in different ways, all bound together by his love, his upbringing, and his extraordinary journey. The first night I stayed in his home, I could barely sleep. I lay awake in a bedroom that was not just comfortable, but truly mine. The sheets were soft, the pillows fluffy, and the silence of the house was not oppressive, it was liberating. For the first time in decades, I felt safe. And yet my mind refused to stop spinning. I thought of the vacant lot, of the night I had been forced to leave him, and of the pain I had carried all those years. Could I forgive myself? Could I finally release the guilt that had haunted me every single day? Robert must have sensed my turmoil, because he came to my room quietly, sat on the edge of the bed, and held my hands. "Mom," he said softly, "you were never to blame. You were 12 years old. You did what you were forced to do, and you survived. I survived. Now we can live together and we can heal." His words were both a balm and a shock. I had spent 20 years believing I was a failure, a mother who had abandoned her child. Yet here he was, standing as living proof that love cannot be destroyed, that the bond between mother and child could survive even the most impossible circumstances. Days turned into weeks, and with each passing moment, I began to reclaim pieces of myself I had thought were lost forever. I learned to cook in a kitchen that was not just functional but beautiful, with counters that didn't wobble and cupboards that opened smoothly. I helped Claudia with small chores, not out of necessity but out of joy, feeling the freedom to live without fear of punishment. We laughed together, sharing stories, sharing meals, and slowly, I realized that I was becoming part of a family that had been built not by obligation, but by love. Robert made sure I felt included in everything. Family dinners became our daily ritual. We sat together, talked about our day, discussed plans, and sometimes just enjoyed silence. The house, which at first seemed intimidating, became a sanctuary. The memories of my youth, the cold nights in the shack, the screams of humiliation, the endless labor were still there, but they no longer defined me. They were shadows that existed to show me how far I had come, how resilient I had been, and how love could finally restore what cruelty had tried to destroy. One afternoon, Robert took me by the arm and led me to the garden. "I want you to have a space to yourself," he said, smiling. "A place to grow things, to nurture life like you should have always been able to." I remember standing there, looking at the empty plots of soil, feeling the sun on my face, and realizing that for the first time, I had the freedom to create something beautiful with my own hands. I planted the first seeds, tomatoes, lettuce, and herbs, and as I watered them, I felt a connection not just to the plants, but to life itself. For decades, I had given everything to survive, to serve, to endure. Now I could give to myself. Robert's children, too, became my companions in this new life. They asked questions about my past, and I answered honestly, choosing carefully what to reveal and what to keep sacred. They listened with the curiosity and empathy of young adults who had grown up in a home of love. They never judged, never asked why it had taken so long. They simply accepted me as I was, as their grandmother, as a woman who had endured unimaginable suffering and emerged alive, grateful, and ready to embrace life fully. And then there were the small joys, simple moments that felt monumental after years of deprivation. Sitting on the porch in the morning sun, drinking coffee while watching the birds flit through the trees. Sharing stories with Claudia about life in Meridian, about the hardships and small triumphs that had shaped me. Listening to Robert talk about his work, his dreams, his gratitude for the life he had built despite the trauma of his early days. Every laugh, every shared meal, every quiet evening in that house was a reminder that life could be beautiful, that love could heal wounds decades old, and that reunion was not just a moment. It was a process, a journey, a rebirth. It was during one of these afternoons, while we tended the garden together, that I finally allowed myself to reflect fully on the 20 years I had spent waiting, suffering, and yearning. I realized that every tear I had shed, every moment of despair, every night of sleeplessness had been leading me here, to this garden, to this family, to this peace. And I understood something profound. My love for my son had never waned, never faltered, even when I was powerless to express it. That love had endured, had guided him, had kept him alive in ways neither of us could fully comprehend. In the quiet of that garden, with the sun warm on my shoulders and the scent of soil and growing things all around, I whispered a prayer of gratitude, not just for Robert, not just for this home, not just for the healing that was finally possible, but for life itself. For surviving, for enduring, for believing, even in the darkest moments, that miracles were possible. And as I looked at Robert, smiling as he helped Daniel plant seedlings, I felt a profound sense of completion. The mother who had been powerless, humiliated, and heartbroken for decades was gone. In her place was a woman reborn, a mother reunited, a grandmother embraced, a survivor finally at peace. The story of abandonment, of suffering, of cruelty inflicted by those who should have protected me had reached its end. And what replaced it was not just love and security, but a profound understanding of the resilience of the human heart, of the power of hope, and of the extraordinary way life can turn tragedy into triumph. In the months that followed my arrival in Jackson, life began to take on a rhythm I had never known. For the first time in my 74 years, though at that time I was only in my 40s, I felt the weight of freedom pressing gently on my shoulders, not as a burden, but as a gift. Each morning I would wake to the soft hum of the house, the smell of fresh coffee drifting from the kitchen, and the laughter of Robert's children echoing down the halls. I would stretch and feel the lightness in my body, a sensation I had forgotten even existed. For decades, every movement had been measured, cautious, constrained by fear. Now I could move freely, breathe deeply, and simply exist without anticipating punishment, humiliation, or cruelty. Robert watched over me with a gentle attentiveness that still surprises me to this day. He never smothered me, never treated me as fragile, yet he was always there, a constant presence of protection and love. In the early days, I found myself hesitant to speak about my past, afraid of opening wounds that might never close. But he had a way of making silence safe, of letting me speak only when I was ready, of allowing me to share pieces of my story in my own time. One afternoon, while we were sitting in the living room, he took my hand in his eyes steady and kind. "Mom," he said, "whatever you need to share, whenever you're ready, I'll listen. And if you never want to speak about it, that's fine too. What matters is that we build the life we should have had together." His words were simple, but they carried a gravity that made my heart swell. For 20 years, I had carried my shame and guilt alone. Now, for the first time, I understood what it meant to be seen, truly seen, and still loved. The first few weeks were not without struggle. I was unaccustomed to leisure, to abundance, to comfort. My hands, so used to labor, felt clumsy on the polished surfaces of the kitchen counters. My mind, trained for vigilance, kept scanning for threats that no longer existed. At night, when I should have slept peacefully, I would lie awake, haunted by memories of the vacant lot, of my son crying in my arms, of my father and brother's cruelty. But Robert never judged, never pushed. He would sit with me quietly, sometimes taking my hand, sometimes letting me cry in solitude. Slowly, I began to learn that grief and relief could coexist, that my past could remain a part of me without defining the entirety of my life. And then there were the children, my grandchildren, though at first I hesitated to call them that. Robert Jr. introduced me to Peter and Sophia with a gentle reverence, as if he understood the fragility of my heart. When I first held Peter in my arms, I felt a sensation that was both familiar and new. The tiny weight of a life in my hands, the warmth of soft skin, the faint scent of innocence and possibility. It was overwhelming. I thought of the baby I had lost, of the 20 years I had spent wondering, praying, and yearning, and yet here was this new life, a gift I had never expected. I whispered to him softly, telling him nothing of my past, only that I loved him and would protect him as fiercely as I could. With Sophia, it was different. She was more curious, more lively, and immediately fascinated by the woman who had arrived into her life seemingly from nowhere. She would follow me around the house, asking endless questions, laughing at my stories, and clinging to my hand as we walked through the garden. I realized then that love has many forms. It can heal, it can nurture, it can redeem. In their eyes, I began to see the future I had never dared to imagine, a life filled with laughter, companionship, and connection. The ache in my heart for the child I had lost began to soften, replaced by a sense of purpose and joy I had not believed possible. Robert's family welcomed me fully. Claudia, with her quiet strength, taught me how to navigate a life of comfort without guilt. She showed me the joys of cooking elaborate meals, of arranging flowers, of setting a table that reflected care and beauty. I had never thought such things were for someone like me, someone who had spent her life surviving, but Claudia made them feel natural, even essential. We would spend hours in the kitchen together, chopping vegetables, kneading dough, and laughing at the clumsiness of my hands, which were more used to the rough work of washing and scrubbing than to delicate culinary tasks. In the evenings, we would sit together on the porch, the sun setting in golden streaks across the sky. Robert would sometimes bring out his guitar, and we would listen to him play softly, the melodies weaving a thread of calm through our lives. It was during these quiet moments that I began to reflect on the woman I had been, the 12-year-old girl forced to abandon her child, the teenager who endured abuse, the adult who carried grief like a shadow, and I realized how far I had come. The survival I had once known was no longer enough. Now I could thrive. The process of healing was not linear. There were days when memories surged back with the force of a storm, when I would sit alone in the garden and feel the pain of those 20 lost years as sharply as if it had happened yesterday. But Robert was always there, gently reminding me that grief is not weakness, that remembering does not undo the life we now have. He encouraged me to write letters to the child I had lost, letters I would never send, letters meant only to release the burden I had carried in silence. I poured out my sorrow, my longing, my regrets, and each word was a step toward liberation. I also began to explore new passions. Gardening became my sanctuary, each seed a symbol of hope and renewal. I planted tomatoes, peppers, herbs, and flowers, and watched as life sprouted from the soil, resilient and unstoppable. I realized that nurturing life in this way mirrored the love I had always carried for the child I had lost, the love that had never faded, even when circumstances forced me to suppress it. Through this act, I began to reclaim the part of myself that had been denied for so long, the part that was capable of joy, creativity, and care. Robert's success and generosity extended beyond mere material comfort. He introduced me to education, to literature, to ideas I had never encountered in my isolated life. Together, we read books, discussed stories, and explored history, philosophy, and art. For the first time, I felt my mind expanding, unshackled by the limitations that poverty, abuse, and fear had imposed. Each day was a revelation, a reminder that life could be vast, beautiful, and meaningful, even after decades of suffering. One afternoon, while we were sitting in the garden, Robert spoke of his own journey, of being found in the vacant lot, of being raised by Mr. Jackson, of the education, guidance, and love that had shaped him into the man he had become. I listened, amazed by the resilience and strength that had been forged in the crucible of his early life. I realized that our stories, though marked by pain and injustice, had ultimately converged in a moment of redemption. The child I had lost had grown into a man capable of rewriting the narrative, capable of restoring the life that had been stolen from us both. As weeks turned into months, I grew into my new identity. I was no longer the frightened, subjugated girl who had survived only by obedience. I was a mother, a grandmother, a woman with agency, love, and dignity. The shadows of my past remained, yes, but they no longer dictated the terms of my existence. I had learned that survival is not merely enduring. It is reclaiming life, embracing love, and allowing oneself to feel joy even after unimaginable loss. And so my days became filled with laughter, with the rhythm of family life, with the simple but profound pleasures of growing plants, sharing meals, telling stories, and watching the next generation flourish. I understood finally that the bond between a mother and her child cannot be severed by time, cruelty, or distance. That bond is eternal, and it carries the power to heal, to restore, and to transform. Life in Jackson unfolded like a dream I had once dared not imagine. Every morning, I woke to the sunlight streaming through large windows, the house filled with warmth and laughter. Robert's home was more than shelter. It was a sanctuary, a place where pain could slowly be replaced with joy. The first time I walked through the garden, feeling the soft soil under my hands as I planted tomatoes and bell peppers, I felt an unfamiliar sense of wonder. Each seed, each leaf, each fragile shoot seemed to whisper that life could begin anew, even after decades of sorrow. I remember standing there, looking out over the neat rows of vegetables, and thinking, I never thought I'd live to see a day like this. My grandchildren became my companions, my joy, my reason to wake up with purpose. Peter, at first shy, would hide behind his father's legs when he saw me, unsure of this new figure in his life. But slowly, trust blossomed. I would tell him stories, just small tales about life, the garden, and sometimes even whimsical little adventures I made up on the spot. Sophia, with her boundless curiosity, would run to me each morning, asking endless questions about the plants, the birds, and the world outside. Watching them grow, learning, laughing, reminded me of the child I had lost, the one I had buried in my memory along with decades of guilt. Now I could nurture these lives and, in a sense, honor the child I had once been forced to abandon. Robert was always near, yet never intrusive. He gave me the space to heal, to rebuild, and to reclaim the parts of myself that had been denied for so long. Our conversations often stretched late into the night, sitting in the living room or on the porch, speaking about everything from philosophy to memories of our pasts. Once, while we sat under the stars, he looked at me and said, "Mom, you've carried more than any human should, but here now you are free to just be." His words resonated in me like a balm on old wounds. I had spent so long surviving that I had almost forgotten how to truly live. The independence I gained was profound. For the first time, I was in charge of my life, free to make choices without fear. I could spend hours tending to my garden, cooking meals, or creating handmade crafts for the family. Each action, however small, felt like reclaiming a piece of myself that had been stolen. And with this freedom came confidence, a new sense of dignity that I had never known as a girl trapped in the shack with Gerald and Bobby. I began to understand that joy and peace were not luxuries, they were a right. The children's laughter was a constant reminder that life could be full of beauty and light. I would watch them play in the garden, sprinkling water on the plants, chasing each other among the trees, and I often thought about the vacant lot where my first child had been abandoned. My heart still ached for those lost years, but now that ache was tempered with gratitude. The love I had for Peter and Sophia, for Robert's family, for the life that had been restored to me, became a river flowing through my soul, cleansing the scars left by decades of fear and suffering. I also discovered the power of routine, of small joys and simple pleasures. Each morning began with tending the garden, a ritual that grounded me. I would prune the tomato plants, check the herbs, and pull weeds, a meditation of sorts, connecting me to life, to the earth, to the possibility of renewal. Afternoons were spent in quiet reflection, sometimes reading, sometimes writing letters I would never send, just pouring my heart onto paper. These letters were a private confession, a way to release the decades of pain and regret that I had carried alone. Through them, I could speak the words I had long silenced, and with each letter, I felt a little lighter, a little more free. The bond with Robert deepened in ways I could not have foreseen. Not merely as mother and son, but as companions navigating the complexities of love, forgiveness, and redemption. He would often recount tales of his youth, of Mr. Jackson, and of the struggles he had endured before finding success. Each story reminded me that resilience can grow from the harshest soil, that love and guidance can transform even the most abandoned life. And he would always smile gently, saying, "We survived, Mom. Together, we're stronger than anything life threw at us." Even the challenges we faced together strengthened our bond. Robert trusted me to make decisions in the household, to advise on matters of daily life, and to offer perspective from someone who had endured real suffering. I became more than just his mother. I became a partner in the quiet management of our shared lives, contributing wisdom shaped by hardship and love. In doing so, I realized that the years of suffering, while unbearable at the time, had forged a resilience that now allowed me to navigate life with clarity and courage. I also reconnected with a part of myself I had long forgotten, the desire to create, to give, to make the world around me better. I began crafting small gifts for friends and neighbors, from tablecloths and rugs to hand-sewn aprons. Each piece carried a fragment of my heart, a reflection of gratitude and joy. People in the neighborhood began to visit me, drawn not just to the garden, but to the warmth and peace that radiated from the home. Slowly, I became part of a community again, something I had lost entirely during the decades of isolation and fear. Through all of this, a quiet spiritual healing began. I understood that life had its own rhythms, its own justice, and that my suffering, while devastating, had prepared me to appreciate the fullness of love and life I now experienced. I learned that hope, even after decades of despair, can manifest in ways that defy understanding. My heart, once burdened with grief and shame, expanded to hold the love of grandchildren, the companionship of Robert and Claudia, and the joy of simple, everyday life. And yet there were moments when the memory of that day in the vacant lot returned with piercing clarity. The terror, the helplessness, the anguish of leaving my child behind, these memories never vanished. But I no longer allowed them to dominate my life. Instead, I transformed them into a source of empathy and strength, a reminder of what had been endured and overcome. I thought often of the boy I had lost, and though I never found him, I honored him through the care, love, and attention I gave to Peter and Sophia, ensuring that they would never know the fear and abandonment I had experienced. It was during these quiet moments, working in the garden or sitting on the porch, that I understood the true miracle of life. It is not always the resolution of past wrongs, nor the return of what was lost, but the creation of something new, beautiful, and unexpected from the ruins of suffering. My life, once defined by cruelty and despair, had become a tapestry of love, connection, and peace. Even now, years later, I often sit and reflect on the journey that brought me here. The 12-year-old girl, forced to make impossible choices, would scarcely recognize the woman I had become. Yet she remains a part of me, a testament to survival, resilience, and the enduring power of a mother's love. And as I watch the grandchildren laughing, running through the garden, and learning about life in a home filled with love and warmth, I am reminded that life can, indeed, redeem even the darkest chapters. There are moments in life when the weight of the past seems unbearable, when memories return with a force that takes your breath away. I often find myself standing in the garden, hands deep in soil, feeling the earth between my fingers, and suddenly I am transported back to that vacant lot. The panic, the helplessness, the agony of leaving my baby, it all comes rushing back like a storm I can never fully escape. But now, unlike before, I can breathe through the pain. I can face it. I can hold it, and yet it does not define me. That is the first gift of forgiveness, not for those who wronged me, but for myself. Forgiving Gerald and Bobby, though, was never easy. I would never erase the terror and suffering they inflicted, the years they stole from me, the love I was denied. But over time, I realized that clinging to hatred only chained me to the past. I could not move forward if I let anger dictate my every day. So, in quiet moments, I chose forgiveness, not for them, but for me, for my peace, for the life I was finally able to live. Each act of tending the garden, each smile shared with Robert or the grandchildren, became a testament to that choice. Life had given me a second chance, and I was determined not to waste it on bitterness. Watching Robert interact with his children is a daily revelation. Peter, now growing into a thoughtful and kind young man, often surprises me with his empathy. I see in him the same qualities that Robert had cultivated within himself, and I am reminded that love, even when delayed, has a way of persisting through generations. Sophia, with her sharp mind and inquisitive nature, brings joy to every corner of the house. And Daniel, the youngest, though more reserved, has a heart that beats with quiet strength. Each of them carries pieces of Robert and pieces of me, fragments of our shared story woven into the fabric of their young lives. I spend hours listening to Robert talk about his children's dreams, their struggles, and the ways in which he hopes to guide them. I often interject with my own experiences, sharing lessons I learned through hardship, the importance of perseverance, compassion, and integrity. They listen with wide eyes, soaking in the stories as if they were maps to navigate life. I feel a profound sense of purpose in these moments, knowing that the love I was once denied now flows abundantly into the next generation. It is, in a way, a redemption for the life I lost. Yet, even amidst this happiness, there are moments of reflection that bring tears. I think of the child I had been forced to leave behind, the life I was never allowed to nurture, the milestones I never witnessed. The ache is deep, but it has changed. It no longer feels like an open wound. It is a quiet remembrance, a shadow that reminds me of both my suffering and my survival. And in that shadow, I also see hope, a reminder that love endures even in the absence of presence, that the bonds of a mother's heart are never broken, no matter the distance or time. Robert never pressured me to dwell on the past, but he understands its weight. On many evenings, we sit together in the living room, the children asleep, and speak in hushed tones about life, fate, and the twists of destiny that brought us back together. He often tells me, "Mom, you were never alone. You survived, and that is your strength. I found you because your love never died, never wavered. That is why I returned." Hearing these words, I feel a mixture of relief, wonder, and profound gratitude. For 20 years, I had carried the unbearable weight of guilt, but in that moment, it lifts, replaced by an overwhelming sense of belonging and recognition. As the years passed, my relationship with the grandchildren deepened in ways I had never anticipated. Peter began to confide in me, sharing his fears about school, friendships, and growing up. I would hold his small hands and offer guidance drawn from my own trials, hoping that the wisdom earned through pain could shield him from the harshness I endured. Sophia would follow me around the garden, asking endless questions, her curiosity insatiable. I taught her how to plant, nurture, and care for life, hoping that she would understand that patience, love, and dedication are what make life bloom. Daniel, quieter but observant, would watch and listen, absorbing the lessons without needing words. Each child became a mirror, reflecting back the strength, resilience, and love that had been cultivated through decades of struggle. I also began to explore my own desires and talents, rediscovering parts of myself that had long been dormant. Crochet, painting, cooking, simple pleasures that had been inaccessible to me for so long became avenues for expression, creativity, and joy. Each finished project, each meal shared with the family, each flower that bloomed in the garden was a small celebration of life regained. And in this process, I learned another truth: that healing is not a singular event, but a continuous journey, an ongoing conversation with oneself and the world. There were also opportunities to share my story beyond the confines of my home. Occasionally, neighbors or community members would gather in the garden, and I would recount tales of perseverance, hope, and the miraculous twists of fate that had shaped my life. Though I never sought recognition or sympathy, I found that speaking my truth allowed others to see the possibility of overcoming hardship. Each story told, each lesson shared, was a thread connecting my experiences to the lives of others, creating a tapestry of resilience that extended far beyond the walls of my house. Even amidst joy, I never forgot the lessons of vigilance and self protection. The scars left by Gerald and Bobby's cruelty were deep, and their echoes remained in the cautious ways I navigated the world. But Robert's presence, his unwavering support, and the stability of his family provided a safe space where I could slowly let go of fear. Over time, I learned to trust again, to open my heart without hesitation, and to embrace life fully, knowing that I was no longer alone. The small rituals of daily life became powerful symbols of recovery. Morning coffee in the sunlit kitchen, tending to the garden, sharing meals, and quiet conversations in the evenings. All of these were reminders that life, after devastation, could still be beautiful. Each act, each moment, reinforced the knowledge that survival was not the end, but the beginning of a new chapter, one where love, family, and self respect were central. And as I reflect on the decades that brought me here, I realize that the true miracle was never just Robert's return. It was the resilience of the human spirit, the unwavering bond between mother and child, and the capacity to rebuild a life even after unimaginable loss. Life had tested me, broken me, and yet in the aftermath, it gave me something far greater than mere survival. It gave me a family, a home, a sense of purpose, and the profound joy of knowing that love can endure, even across decades of separation and suffering. There comes a moment when you realize that the life you thought was lost forever can, in fact, bloom again in ways you never imagined. For 20 years, I had lived under the shadow of fear and regret, haunted by the memory of a helpless baby left in a vacant lot, a tiny life I had been forced to abandon. Yet now, as I watched Robert interact with his children, as I heard their laughter echo through the halls of his home, I finally understood that life had its own way of rewriting destinies. That knowledge filled me with a quiet awe, a mix of gratitude and disbelief that the very child I had lost, the son I had mourned every day, had grown into the man who had returned to save me. I remember that first evening at Robert's house after we had settled in, when we sat together in the living room, a warm fire flickering in the hearth. Robert's hands were steady, reassuring, as he poured tea for both of us. I was overwhelmed with emotion, and I found myself speaking before I could stop, recounting moments from my youth, my despair, the years of pain, the nights spent questioning why fate had been so cruel. He listened quietly, his eyes never leaving mine, and in his gaze I saw understanding, empathy, and love. For the first time in 2 decades, I did not feel alone. Robert spoke then, in that calm, firm voice that had always held authority and kindness. Mom, you did what you had to do. You survived. You loved me even when circumstances kept us apart. And now we can finally make up for lost time. His words, simple as they were, pierced through every layer of guilt I had carried, breaking apart the chains that had held me prisoner to my own sorrow. In that instant, I realized that the weight of those 20 years, while immense, had not destroyed me. Instead, it had prepared me to recognize and embrace the extraordinary gift I had been given: the chance to live, to love, and to be loved in return. The following weeks were a whirlwind of adjustments, revelations, and small joys. I learned the rhythms of Robert's household, the ways in which he nurtured his children, and the subtle traditions that shaped their family life. Breakfasts were lively, filled with chatter and teasing. Afternoons were spent in the garden or reading together. Evenings brought quiet reflections and stories shared before bedtime. Each day, I felt the invisible threads of connection weaving a bond between us that was stronger than any years of separation could undo. Peter, the eldest, often surprised me with his insight and thoughtfulness. At just 8 years old, he already exhibited a depth of empathy that reminded me of Robert at the same age. He would sit beside me in the garden, asking endless questions about plants, life, and the world beyond Jackson. I found joy in answering, teaching him not only about gardening but also about resilience, about facing adversity without surrendering to despair. I told him stories of my youth, not to frighten, but to instill courage and understanding of the strength that lies within a person who refuses to give up. Sophia, 5 years old, was a whirlwind of curiosity and energy. She insisted on following me everywhere, mimicking my movements in the kitchen, in the garden, and even in the quiet corners of the house. Her questions were endless, and I cherished the opportunity to guide her, to watch her mind expand, to feel the joy of nurturing curiosity without the fear or constraints that had defined my own childhood. There was an innocence in her that reminded me of the child I had lost, and each smile she gave me seemed like a small miracle, proof that love could survive even the harshest trials. Daniel, the youngest, though quieter and more reserved, observed everything with a keen intelligence. He did not speak much at first, but I noticed how he listened intently, absorbing the lessons and stories shared by Robert, me, and even his siblings. In him, I saw the calm patience and thoughtfulness that sometimes escapes notice but carries immense strength. As I interacted with him, I felt a profound sense of continuity, as though the life I had once been denied was now thriving in these children, in ways I could never have imagined. Living in Robert's home also allowed me to explore parts of myself that had been dormant for decades. I began to cultivate my interests, things that had been suppressed under years of servitude and fear. Crochet, gardening, cooking, these simple pleasures became not just hobbies, but expressions of my newfound freedom. Each finished crochet piece, each dish prepared, each bloom in the garden became a tangible reminder of the life I now had, a life shaped by my perseverance and the unwavering love of my son. Even simple routines became profound experiences. Walking through the garden at dawn, feeling the crisp air on my skin, listening to the birds, and smelling the soil was no longer a chore but a meditation, a daily affirmation that life could indeed be gentle, beautiful, and rewarding. Robert often joined me, sometimes quietly, sometimes with laughter, and in those moments I felt the fullness of family, a completeness I had once believed impossible. Yet amidst all this happiness, there were moments of reflection that brought tears. I often found myself thinking of the baby I had been forced to abandon, the life I never got to live with him in those early years, and the milestones I had missed. But these moments no longer brought despair. Instead, they reminded me of the resilience that had carried both of us through decades of uncertainty. The past had shaped us, yes, but it no longer defined the joy and security of the present. Robert never pressured me to dwell on old pain, but he understood its significance. Many nights after the children were asleep, we would sit quietly and speak of life, fate, and the extraordinary twists that had brought us together. He often said, "Mom, your love never died. That's why I found you. That's why I came back. And now we have the chance to write the rest of our story together." Those words resonated in me like a song I had long forgotten, a melody of hope, validation, and unconditional love. As months turned into years, my connection with Robert and the children deepened. I found myself taking on roles I had never dreamed possible: storyteller, teacher, confidant, grandmother, friend. Each interaction reinforced the realization that life, even after unimaginable suffering, could offer a second chance, a life of fulfillment and love. I no longer measured my days in terms of survival, but in terms of joy, shared experiences, and the beauty of relationships nurtured over time. Even as I embraced this new life, I carried with me a sense of responsibility. I wanted to ensure that Peter, Sophia, and Daniel understood the values that had guided Robert and me: resilience, compassion, honesty, and the power of love to overcome adversity. Through stories, guidance, and example, I sought to instill in them the knowledge that life could be challenging, yes, but that strength, courage, and kindness were always within reach. And so, life in Robert's home became a rhythm of love, learning, and laughter. The echoes of the past remained, but they no longer haunted me. They reminded me of the journey we had traveled and the extraordinary reunion that had transformed our lives. I often marveled at the twists of fate that had allowed a baby abandoned in a vacant lot to grow into a man capable of rewriting our destinies, giving me not only my son back, but also a family, a home, and the profound joy of belonging. In those quiet moments when the sun set over the gardens and the children's laughter faded into calm, I realized something vital. Life is rarely linear, and its hardships do not define its conclusion. The trials I endured, the years of loss and pain, had prepared me to appreciate and embrace the extraordinary gift of family, love, and security that I now held. And in that realization, I found not just peace, but a profound gratitude that carried me through each day with hope and joy. There's a feeling that hits you when you come back to the place where you were born, the place that shaped you, even if life tried to bury it beneath years of pain and hardship. I hadn't seen Meridian for nearly 30 years. Jackson had become my home, a beautiful place filled with love, comfort, and family. But my heart, strangely, still longed for the narrow streets, the wooden shacks, and even the dusty, uneven roads of my childhood. It was as if part of me had been waiting all those years for a chance to return and reclaim the fragments of a life that had been stolen from me. In 1998, when I was 47, I told Robert I wanted to go back just for a while. I explained that it wasn't that I was unhappy in Jackson. It was the pull of the land, the memories, the simple life that had once been all I knew. Robert hesitated, concern flashing across his face, but he understood. He held my hands and said softly, "Mom, if this is where your heart needs to be, then we'll make it happen. But promise me you'll stay safe." I promised, though I knew deep down that safety had always been a fragile thing in my life. When I arrived back in Meridian, the town seemed smaller, quieter, yet more alive with memories than I expected. The old roads, the vacant lots, the market stalls, they had all changed in some ways, but in others they remained painfully familiar. The place where I had abandoned my baby, where I had been forced to surrender the most precious part of my life, had been transformed. The lot had been cleared, and a small market now stood where trash and weeds had once reigned. Standing there, I could almost hear the cries of my child mingling with the wind, as if the land itself had preserved the memory, refusing to let it fade. I felt an odd mixture of emotions. Sorrow for what had been lost, relief that the lot was no longer a place of horror, and a strange sense of closure that I had never thought possible. I wandered through the streets, visiting old neighbors, listening to their stories, and realizing that life had continued here even without me. Some faces brought back pain, reminders of what I had endured, but others offered comfort, a sense that despite everything, I still belonged to this place. Robert had insisted on giving me a home of my own, something small but warm, where I could live independently while still feeling connected to the life I had rebuilt. When I moved into that little house with its 3 rooms and a large backyard perfect for a garden, I felt a calm I had never known before. For the first time, I had a space that was mine, where no one could humiliate me, force me to labor beyond my will, or remind me of past mistakes. The garden became my sanctuary. Every seed I planted, every sprout that broke through the soil, felt like a piece of my life taking root, reclaiming the joy that had been stolen from me as a young girl. Days turned into weeks and weeks into months, and I fell into a peaceful rhythm. Mornings were spent tending to the garden, feeling the cool earth between my fingers, listening to the birds, and watching the sun rise over the quiet streets of Meridian. Afternoons were for tending to the house, arranging flowers, and sometimes visiting neighbors to share tea, stories, and small acts of kindness. Evenings were quiet, filled with reflection and gratitude. I realized that life had given me more than I could have imagined: freedom, security, and a chance to reconnect with myself in ways I never thought possible. But it wasn't just the physical return to Meridian that healed me, it was the emotional reconnection with my past. I began visiting the small church near my old home, where memories of Sunday services and family gatherings had once filled my childhood with both joy and discipline. I met people who had known my family, who remembered me as a young girl, and I began to tell fragments of my story carefully in order to find understanding and reconciliation. Every shared conversation was a small step toward peace, a way to release the heavy burden of guilt and fear that had clung to me for decades. The garden in my backyard became more than just a hobby. It became a symbol of rebirth and resilience. I planted tomatoes, lettuce, kale, bell peppers, and sweet potatoes, alongside herbs like rosemary, basil, mint, and lemon balm. Each plant seemed to mirror my own journey from fragile beginnings to strong, fruitful growth. I nurtured them with patience, careful attention, and love, and in doing so, I learned to nurture myself too. The act of cultivating life brought me a sense of purpose that no amount of wealth, security, or comfort could replace. One of my greatest joys came from sharing this new life with others. Neighborhood children would often stop by to help water the plants or pick ripe vegetables, their laughter filling the yard and bringing warmth to my heart. I taught them about the plants, how to care for them, and why patience and persistence mattered. In their smiles, I saw reflections of my own lost childhood, the innocence and curiosity I had been denied, now flourishing in the next generation. The sense of community I rebuilt in Meridian also became a vital part of my healing. Friends from my past and new acquaintances alike became companions in my daily life. On Tuesdays and Thursdays, Mrs. Zelda, Mrs. Constance, and Mrs. Neen would come by for coffee, conversation, and laughter. Their presence reminded me that life was not meant to be endured in isolation. Connection, friendship, and shared moments were as important to well being as any material comfort or security. Through these simple routines, I learned that peace was not just a state of mind, it was a practice, cultivated through care, attention, and love for oneself and others. The home that Robert had given me in Jackson had provided security, but the life I was building in Meridian provided fulfillment, a sense of agency, and the chance to live authentically. I finally felt in control of my destiny, no longer a prisoner of past abuses or regrets. Yet, even in this peace, I never forgot the lessons of my past. The story of my son, the trauma I had endured at the hands of my father and brother, and the years of fear and guilt remained etched in my memory. But rather than weighing me down, these memories became the foundation for resilience and empathy. They reminded me to protect those I loved, to cherish every moment of joy, and to recognize that even the darkest chapters of life could eventually lead to light. I often thought about Robert's wisdom and the values instilled in him by Mr. Jackson, the man who had found him in that vacant lot and raised him with love and integrity. It amazed me that someone who had suffered such a cruel beginning could grow into a man capable of immense kindness, justice, and generosity. His life was a testament to the power of nurture, of opportunity, and of the belief that one can overcome even the deepest wounds. And now that lesson had come full circle, bringing me back not only to my son, but also to myself, to a life I had thought impossible. Walking through the streets of Meridian, tending my garden, and visiting the neighbors, I often reflected on the twists of fate that had brought me here. The very place that had once symbolized loss and pain now represented hope and renewal. The land that had witnessed my deepest sorrow now nurtured my happiest moments, and in those quiet reflections I found clarity. Life does not always follow the path we expect, but it has a way of balancing pain with beauty, loss with reunion, despair with joy. The return to Meridian also allowed me to make amends in small ways. I reconnected with old neighbors and acquaintances who had once been aware of my struggles. While some had long moved away or passed on, others remained, and in sharing my story, I found understanding, compassion, and even forgiveness, not only from them but from myself. This process of reconciliation was slow but profound, a balm for wounds that had festered for decades. Through these years, I realized that the greatest healing comes not just from the love of others, but from reclaiming your own life. The freedom to make choices, to nurture, to create, and to connect allowed me to transform pain into purpose. Every vegetable I grew, every friend I welcomed, every moment of quiet reflection became a testament to survival, courage, and the enduring power of love. And in all of this, the presence of my son, Robert, remained the most powerful source of joy and reassurance. His success, kindness, and devotion were not just gifts, they were living proof that love, even when delayed or challenged, can triumph. Each visit he made, every conversation we shared, and the laughter of his children in my garden reminded me that the impossible had become real. I had found peace, security, and belonging, and all of it had been born from the very child I had once been forced to abandon. When Robert introduced me to his children for the first time, I felt a tremor in my chest I hadn't experienced in decades. It was as if time had folded in on itself, bridging the 20-year gap of loss and pain with the sheer innocence and curiosity of my grandchildren. Robert Jr., Marina, and Daniel, each of them carried pieces of him, pieces of the life I had once been forced to abandon, and seeing them felt like glimpsing the child I had lost in 1,000 different forms. Robert Jr., the eldest, was a bright, compassionate boy who had grown into a man driven by integrity and empathy. When I held him in my arms for the first time, I was flooded with memories of my own son as a newborn, fragile, helpless, and perfect. His warmth and energy reminded me of the bond I had been denied, the lullabies I never got to sing, and the nights I would have spent soothing his cries. Yet holding him, I felt an unspoken connection that transcended the years. In that instant, the pain of abandonment, the hollow, crushing grief of losing a child, was softened, replaced by gratitude that life had somehow delivered this gift back to me. Marina, my only granddaughter at the time, had a spark in her eyes, a curiosity about the world that mirrored my own when I was her age. She would sit beside me for hours, asking questions about the plants in my garden, the stories of the neighborhood, and the strange, sometimes magical events of my life. She reminded me that knowledge and love could grow in even the most unexpected places, that the smallest seed could bloom into something extraordinary if nurtured with care. Through her, I felt the opportunity to teach, to pass on the wisdom born of suffering and survival. Daniel, the youngest, had a quiet determination, a gentle demeanor that spoke of patience and thoughtfulness. He would help me water the garden, plant new seeds, and sometimes just sit with me in silence, enjoying the simple peace of the yard. In him, I saw the lessons Robert had learned from Mr. Jackson, the lessons of compassion, responsibility, and perseverance. It amazed me how the love and guidance of a single person could ripple through generations, shaping lives in ways one could never fully predict. As the years passed, I became deeply entwined in their lives. I celebrated their victories, mourned their setbacks, and watched them grow with a pride that filled my heart to bursting. Every school recital, every athletic achievement, every milestone became a shared triumph, a testament to resilience and the enduring bonds of family. For the first time in decades, I no longer felt like a ghost in my own life, haunted by what I had lost. I was present, I was loved, and I was part of a family that valued me not for what I had endured, but simply for who I was. The garden continued to be my sanctuary, a space where the children would run, play, and learn. We would harvest vegetables together, wash the fresh produce under the sun, and cook meals that filled the house with warmth and laughter. The simple joys of life, the taste of fresh tomatoes, the aroma of basil, the thrill of watching seeds sprout, became rituals that reminded me of how far I had come. Every plant in that garden felt like a victory, every bloom a declaration that life could flourish, even after decades of neglect and suffering. Living in Meridian also allowed me to reconnect with the community in ways I never imagined possible. I met other women who had experienced hardship, offering them support and guidance as they navigated their own challenges. I listened to their stories, shared mine in fragments, and learned that healing was not a solitary journey. Strength could be drawn from others, and in giving, one often received far more than was expected. The yard, the garden, and the house became a hub of warmth and refuge, a small sanctuary in the heart of a town that had once witnessed so much pain in my life. Every evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and the sky was painted in shades of gold and pink, I would sit on my porch, feeling the weight of years lift from my shoulders. The laughter of my grandchildren, the gentle presence of Robert, and the quiet beauty of my garden reminded me that life had a rhythm, a balance, and a way of restoring what had been broken. I reflected on the cruel twists of fate that had once defined my existence, the nights spent in fear, the years of labor, the moments of despair, and I realized that each hardship had been a thread woven into the tapestry of resilience that now defined me. One of the most profound moments came when Robert, noticing the care I took in nurturing the garden and the children, remarked softly, "Mom, the love you never stopped giving, even when we were apart, is the reason this family thrives. You taught me the power of compassion without ever knowing it would come full circle." Those words, simple yet weighty, brought tears to my eyes. They affirmed that the love of a mother, though tested and stretched, could endure any separation, any cruelty, and any passage of time. The bond between a parent and child is not measured by presence alone, but by the depth of the heart's connection, and Robert's life, and now his children's lives, were proof of that truth. As the years unfolded, the house became a repository of memories, not of pain, but of healing and joy. Photos of the grandchildren lined the walls, jars of preserved herbs and vegetables filled the shelves, and the scent of baking bread or simmering soup became a constant reminder of comfort and abundance. The air was alive with laughter, stories, and the sounds of a family bound not by necessity, but by love and choice. I finally understood the profound difference between surviving and truly living. I also began to reflect on the lessons of forgiveness and letting go. While I never forgot the cruelty of my father and brother, I learned to release the weight of their actions from my heart. Holding on to anger would have kept me trapped in the shadows of the past. Instead, I chose to honor the life I had now, the children who called me grandmother, and the son who had restored my world. The past remained, but it no longer dictated my present. In its place, gratitude, love, and peace flourished, reshaping the trajectory of my days. Every visit from Robert became a celebration, a renewal of the bond that had once been severed. We would sit together, sharing stories of Jackson, reminiscing about Mr. Jackson and the lessons he had taught, and reflecting on the journey that had brought us back together. His children would interject with laughter and questions, and in those moments I felt the continuity of life, the passing of love from one generation to the next. Even simple routines like preparing meals or tending to the yard took on new meaning. They were no longer chores imposed by necessity or survival. They were acts of care, of creation, and of nurturing the bonds that had healed me. I found joy in small things. The chirping of birds in the morning, the warmth of sunlight on my face, the laughter echoing across the yard. Life, in its quiet moments, had revealed itself to be abundant, even after decades of deprivation and suffering. Yet, despite the joy and peace, there was always a sense of wonder at the miraculous turn of events. 30 years ago, I had been forced to abandon a baby, a child whose cries haunted me for decades. I had imagined every possible tragedy, every way the world might have conspired against him. And yet here he was grown, strong, and filled with love, not only giving me a second chance but creating a life in which I could flourish. That miraculous reunion reshaped my understanding of fate, resilience, and the power of enduring love. Looking back now, I see those 30 years not merely as a period of suffering, but as a prologue to the life I live today. The hardships taught me strength, patience, and empathy. The pain taught me to value every moment of peace. The absence of my son taught me to hold hope even when all seemed lost. And the return of my son brought the greatest lesson of all, that life has a way of balancing the scales, of restoring what was broken, and of revealing the beauty that can emerge from even the darkest circumstances. When I first returned to Meridian to live in my little house, I felt a strange mixture of relief and apprehension. After so many years of being dominated by fear, of existing in a life ruled by my father and brother's cruelty, stepping into a space that was truly my own was both exhilarating and terrifying. The walls of this new home didn't just hold me, they represented the freedom, the choice, and the dignity I had been denied for decades. For the first time in my life, I could breathe without the weight of oppression pressing down on my chest. The mornings became my sanctuary. I woke with the sun, feeling the gentle warmth on my face, and I would step into the yard to tend to my garden. There, amidst the soil and the plants, I felt connected to life in a way I never had before. Every seed I planted was a symbol of renewal, every flower that bloomed a reminder that life could flourish even after immense hardship. I could not undo the past, but I could nurture the present and shape the future. And as the garden grew, so too did a sense of pride and accomplishment that I had never been allowed to feel. Each day followed a rhythm that soothed my spirit. I would water the tomatoes, prune the herbs, and care for the vegetables that thrived under my hands. These simple tasks, repetitive and humble, became meditative acts of love, love for the life I had reclaimed, love for the children and grandchildren who would visit, and love for myself, finally learning that I was worthy of care and attention. My days were no longer dictated by the demands of others or the fear of abuse. They belonged to me entirely, and that freedom was intoxicating. But the true transformation was not just in the physical space of my home. It was in the quiet reconstruction of my soul. For years, I had carried the weight of guilt and shame, believing that the abandonment of my son was my fault, that I had failed as a mother. Those feelings had eaten at me, leaving me hollow and fearful, unable to trust that life could offer anything but pain. And yet, Robert's return shattered that belief. He showed me that my choices had been constrained by forces far beyond my control, that my love for him had never wavered, and that my worth was not measured by circumstances but by the depth of my heart. I began to embrace small joys that I had once dismissed or ignored. I learned to bake again, filling my kitchen with the aroma of bread, pies, and cookies, and I would share these treats with neighbors and friends. I would sit on my porch in the evenings, watching the sunset paint the sky in hues of orange and pink, reflecting on how life had taken a path so dark and yet led me to such light. I found myself laughing more freely, speaking my mind, and expressing gratitude for the simple blessings that I had once overlooked. The community around me became a source of connection and fulfillment. Friends would stop by to share tea and stories, neighbors would ask for advice about gardening or cooking, and the younger generation sought guidance on navigating life's challenges. I became a quiet pillar of strength for those who struggled, offering empathy born of firsthand experience. I realized that my suffering had given me a gift, the ability to understand pain, to recognize resilience, and to guide others through their own struggles. In a way, the darkest years of my life had prepared me to offer light to others. One of the most profound moments of this period came during the annual visits of Robert and his family. Robert, Claudia, and the children would arrive, bringing laughter, warmth, and life into my home. Seeing the children play in the garden, listening to their questions, and observing their curiosity about the world reminded me of the child I had lost and the future that had been restored to me through Robert's love and determination. I could see pieces of myself and my son in each of them, a living testament to the endurance of love and the passage of legacy across generations. There were moments, of course, when memories of the past returned unbidden, sharp and piercing. I would sometimes see a scrap of cloth, a shadow on the ground, or hear a cry in the distance, and I would be transported back to that vacant lot, to the night I had left my son, to the fear and helplessness that had consumed me. But rather than being consumed by these memories, I learned to acknowledge them, to recognize the pain, and then gently place it aside. Each time I faced these echoes of my past without being overtaken by them, I felt stronger, more resilient, and more capable of fully embracing the present. Living independently in Meridian also gave me the opportunity to nurture my relationships with Robert's family in new ways. I became more than a mother and grandmother. I became a mentor, a confidant, and a guide. I would spend afternoons with Marina discussing law, justice, and the challenges she faced as a young professional. I would help Robert Jr. navigate the early years of fatherhood, sharing insights on patience and nurturing. And with Daniel, I shared practical wisdom and life lessons, guiding him through engineering challenges and personal decisions. The bond we shared transcended blood. It was built on trust, love, and the understanding that life, even after years of hardship, could be rich and fulfilling. The home itself reflected this transformation. It was small and simple, but it was filled with life and care. Every corner held a memory or a moment of happiness. The garden, bursting with colors and scents, was a living testament to growth and renewal. The kitchen, warm and fragrant, became a place of gathering, laughter, and nourishment. Even the furniture, modest and well-loved, carried the sense of comfort and stability that I had never known in my childhood home. Each element of my life in Meridian was a declaration that I was no longer a victim, no longer a prisoner of fear, and no longer defined by the cruelty of others. As the years continued, I also began to reflect on the broader lessons of my life. I realized that suffering and resilience are often intertwined, that the challenges we endure can prepare us for moments of unexpected grace. I understood that the love of a parent, even when tested, never truly fades, and that hope, though it may seem distant, can persist through decades of doubt and despair. Most importantly, I learned that life has a way of restoring balance, of bringing back what was lost, and of revealing the beauty and joy that can arise from the ashes of pain. Now at 74, I can say that I live each day with gratitude, presence, and purpose. I rise early, tend to my garden, and take pleasure in the small, tangible joys of life. I cherish my visits with Robert and his family, finding in their presence the fulfillment of a love that had once seemed impossible. I embrace the community around me, sharing my experiences, my wisdom, and my compassion. And most importantly, I carry within me the knowledge that no matter how dark or cruel the world may seem, there is always the potential for redemption, healing, and joy. Looking back on those 30 years of separation, I can see them now as part of a story of endurance, love, and the extraordinary ways in which life can surprise us. The pain of my youth, the hardships I endured, and the years of longing were not wasted. They were the crucible in which my resilience, hope, and capacity for love were forged. And the return of my son, the life we rebuilt together, and the joy of my grandchildren are the proof that even the deepest wounds can give way to profound happiness. Even after years of peace in my little house, I knew that the story of my life was not just about survival. It was also about understanding, forgiveness, and the full circle that life had brought me. I had spent decades consumed by anger and grief toward my father and brother, and while their cruelty had shaped my early life, it was their absence in my later years that truly allowed me to reclaim my freedom. Watching them walk away powerless after Robert reclaimed the property and exposed their wrongdoings, I felt a complex mixture of satisfaction and sorrow. Satisfaction because justice had been served, but sorrow because I had wished, in a different world, that they could have changed, that they could have been human enough to see the consequences of their cruelty. Forgiveness did not come immediately. In fact, there were days when I could barely speak their names without feeling the cold grip of the past. I had to remind myself that forgiveness was not for them, it was for me. Holding on to anger for 30 years would have chained me forever to a life of bitterness and regret. And so, piece by piece, I began to let go. I began to view my past not as a chain that bound me, but as a foundation that had built the strength, resilience, and wisdom I now carried. Forgiving did not mean forgetting, nor did it mean excusing what they had done. It meant freeing my spirit so I could fully embrace the life I had earned, the love I had reclaimed, and the peace that now surrounded me. With forgiveness came a sense of clarity. I understood that every step of my life, every hardship, every moment of despair had led me to this point, a point where I could finally live fully, where I could enjoy the simple pleasures of tending my garden, sitting on my porch in the evenings, and watching the seasons change over the land I loved. I felt a deep gratitude for Robert, who had not only restored our connection, but had also modeled a life of integrity, compassion, and determination. He had shown me that even when the world seems unjust, a single act of courage and love can alter the course of generations. The relationship I now had with my grandchildren brought a joy that words could barely capture. Peter, with his boundless energy and curiosity, reminded me of the wonder of childhood, the way the smallest discovery could light up a face with amazement. Sophia, with her quiet intelligence and gentle spirit, reflected the care and thoughtfulness that Robert had instilled in his children. And when I held the youngest, a baby whose soft skin and tiny fingers stirred memories I had buried for decades, I felt the full circle of life, the past pain meeting the present joy, the old wounds transforming into a source of wisdom and love. Each laugh, each question, each hug from them reminded me that life, even after suffering, could be abundant and generous. Living back in Meridian allowed me to reconnect with the community that had once witnessed my pain. Neighbors who had watched my struggles now saw me thriving. They saw a woman who had endured unimaginable hardship and emerged not just surviving, but truly living. I began to share my experiences with those around me, not in a way that sought sympathy, but to offer hope. To show that even when life seems impossible, when injustice seems insurmountable, it is possible to reclaim one's dignity, find one's voice, and create a life of meaning. I became someone people could turn to for advice, for guidance, and for reassurance that resilience and love can conquer even the darkest chapters of life. Robert, too, continued to teach me life's profound lessons. He had always respected my independence, never pressuring me to move in with him, yet always ensuring that I knew I was deeply loved and protected. He reminded me that strength is not measured solely by success or wealth, but by courage, compassion, and the ability to rise above cruelty and despair. When we spoke, often late into the evening, he would recount the challenges he had faced growing up under Mr. Jackson's care, the struggles he overcame in school and business, and how every decision he made was motivated by a desire to honor those who had loved him when the world had turned away. Through his stories, I understood that our lives, though separated by decades of pain, had always been linked by love, the kind that endures, that never fades, and that ultimately triumphs over even the most harrowing circumstances. One of the most powerful lessons I learned during this time was the unpredictability of life. We often think we are trapped in our circumstances, that the past defines our future, that pain will last forever. But life has a way of surprising us when we least expect it. My own experience had taught me that hope, even when dim, can ignite miracles. That child abandoned in a vacant lot, my son, was proof that what seems lost can return, stronger and more resilient than ever. And the years I spent in hardship, though agonizing, had cultivated patience, empathy, and a profound appreciation for the simplest blessings: a warm bed, a nourishing meal, the laughter of children, and the freedom to choose one's path. I also discovered the transformative power of storytelling. Sharing my journey with others, whether friends, neighbors, or family, allowed me to process the pain, celebrate the victories, and instill hope in those who might be enduring their own trials. Each retelling reinforced the truth that suffering does not define us, that we have the capacity to rebuild, and that love, even when tested, remains the most potent force in our lives. In speaking my story, I reclaimed it, took ownership of it, and turned it into a source of empowerment, not just for myself, but for anyone who might hear it. As the years passed, I came to see that life's true richness lies in its cycles. The garden flourished each season, the children grew and carried pieces of my spirit with them, and the relationships I nurtured blossomed into a network of support, love, and connection. I witnessed the fruits of patience, the rewards of resilience, and the beauty of healing. I realized that while we cannot control every event in our lives, we can control how we respond, how we heal, and how we use our experiences to cultivate meaning and joy. My suffering had shaped me, but it had not broken me. It had prepared me to embrace the fullness of life that I now lived. And so, sitting on my porch, watching the sun rise over Meridian, I felt a profound sense of peace. I was no longer the frightened 12-year-old girl who had faced unimaginable cruelty, nor the weary woman weighed down by decades of guilt and longing. I was a mother, a grandmother, a woman who had endured, who had reclaimed her dignity, and who had discovered that love, patience, and resilience can overcome even the most insurmountable obstacles. Life, I realized, is not a straight path. It twists, it turns, it tests, and sometimes it delivers the most extraordinary surprises when we least expect them. Looking back on my journey, I understood that every moment of suffering had been a step toward this life of fulfillment. Every act of cruelty I endured, every tear I shed, every night of hopelessness had been part of a story that ultimately led me to love, peace, and joy. My son's return had not just reunited me with him, it had reunited me with life itself, reminding me that miracles, though rare, are always possible. And in that realization, I found the ultimate freedom, the freedom to forgive, to love, and to live without fear, carrying with me the certainty that even the deepest wounds can give rise to the most beautiful chapters of life. As I sit here in my garden, surrounded by the gentle hum of life, I often reflect on the extraordinary journey that brought me to this moment. From a frightened 12-year-old girl forced to abandon her newborn baby to a 74-year-old woman living in peace, love, and gratitude, my life has been a testament to resilience, hope, and the enduring power of a mother's love. What strikes me most is not the suffering I endured, nor even the unimaginable cruelty I faced, but the way life has a way of circling back, of restoring balance, and of giving back what was taken when we least expect it. I see it in my grandchildren, the spark of curiosity in Peter, the thoughtful questions of Sophia, the laughter that fills my little house with joy. Their lives are intertwined with mine in a way that heals even the oldest scars. Every story I share with them, every lesson I impart, is infused with the wisdom earned through decades of hardship. I tell them that life will challenge them, that people may not always be kind, and that circumstances will sometimes seem unbearable. But I also tell them this: no matter how deep the pain, no matter how insurmountable the obstacle, love and perseverance can rewrite your story. My own life is proof of that. Looking back, I realized that my journey was never just about surviving. It was about learning to embrace life fully, even when it seemed impossible. I learned that suffering can teach us empathy, that cruelty can sharpen our understanding of justice, and that loss can deepen our appreciation for every small blessing. Each day I spend tending my garden, I feel a profound connection to the cycles of nature, the way plants grow, flourish, and bear fruit despite storms, drought, and decay. In many ways, my life mirrors this natural resilience. I too have grown, flourished, and borne the fruit of love and joy despite the storms of my past. My son, Robert, has been the most extraordinary teacher of all. Not only did he restore my life in ways I could not have imagined, but he also showed me the power of integrity, perseverance, and compassion. Watching him build a life of success, kindness, and strength, I see every quality I once feared had been lost, reborn in the man who returned to me. His children, my grandchildren, carry this legacy forward, reminding me that the choices we make ripple far beyond our own lives. Every act of love, every gesture of kindness, and every decision to rise above cruelty echoes across generations. I have come to understand that the true measure of life is not found in wealth, status, or recognition, but in the love we give and receive, the courage we summon in the face of adversity, and the resilience we cultivate when life seems determined to break us. The years I spent under my father's and brother's oppression could have hardened me, made me bitter, or left me broken. But instead, they shaped me into a woman who values freedom, cherishes love, and understands the irreplaceable importance of hope. I learned to see the beauty in small victories, in quiet moments, and in the grace that life sometimes bestows unexpectedly. Returning to Meridian, reconnecting with the place of my birth, and building a life of my own choosing gave me a sense of fulfillment I had never known. My little house, my garden, the laughter of friends and family, and the simple routines of daily life, all of these became a sanctuary where I could finally exhale, finally live, and finally be free from the shadows of my past. And in this sanctuary, I realized that my story was no longer only about pain. It was about triumph, wisdom, and the extraordinary ways in which life can restore balance. I also began to understand the power of storytelling as a means of healing and empowerment. Sharing my experiences with those around me, not as a victim, but as a survivor, allowed me to transform my pain into a source of guidance for others. I found that people, friends, neighbors, and even strangers, were deeply moved by my story, finding courage, hope, and inspiration in the narrative of resilience I had lived. Through storytelling, I could honor the memory of the past while empowering the present, showing others that even in the darkest moments, light can return and life can be rebuilt. As the years have passed, I have seen the impact of this lesson ripple outward. Children in my neighborhood, parents facing struggles, and even friends who have endured hardship have come to me for guidance. They listen not only to the events of my life, but to the wisdom embedded in those experiences. That hope is never truly lost, that courage can be cultivated even in despair, and that love, especially a mother's love, is a force that cannot be extinguished. I tell them that life's hardships are not the end of the story, but often the preparation for a greater chapter yet to come. In many ways, I feel as though I am living the life I was always meant to live, the life I deserved but had to fight for through unimaginable trials. My days are filled with laughter, love, and purpose. I rise early, tend to my garden, engage with friends, enjoy meals with family, and reflect on the blessings I have received. Each day feels like a gift, a precious opportunity to nurture life, to spread kindness, and to honor the journey that brought me here. The joy I feel now is rooted not only in the return of my son, but also in the triumph of resilience, in the reclamation of a life once stolen, and in the knowledge that hope can endure even in the bleakest of circumstances. Robert's example, the love of my grandchildren, and the life I have built in Meridian have taught me a profound truth that no matter how deep the suffering, how prolonged the injustice, or how painful the loss, it is never too late for life to restore what has been taken. Miracles, though rare, are real. Redemption, though delayed, is possible. And love, even when separated by decades and tragedy, can conquer all obstacles. I have seen it in my own life, and I carry that truth in my heart every single day. And so, as I sit here watching the sun set over my garden, I am filled with gratitude for the hardships that shaped me, for the love that restored me, and for the extraordinary circle of life that brought my son back to me. I understand now that the darkest chapters of life are not the end, but often the prelude to the most beautiful transformations. My story, though born of pain, has become one of hope, resilience, and the extraordinary power of love, a story that continues to unfold in the laughter of my grandchildren, the warmth of my garden, and the quiet moments of reflection that remind me how far I have come. Every scar, every tear, every moment of longing has led me to this place of peace and joy. I am a woman who was forced to abandon her baby, yet I have been reunited with the love I thought lost forever. I am a mother, a grandmother, and a survivor who has learned that life, though unpredictable and often cruel, has a remarkable way of setting things right. And in that knowledge, I find the deepest comfort, the most profound gratitude, and the unwavering belief that even in the darkest moments, life can surprise us in ways beyond imagination. Even now, many years after the moment my son returned to me, I often find myself reflecting on the life I've lived, the pain, the longing, the unimaginable moments of despair, and the eventual, almost miraculous turn of events that brought me to peace. It's astonishing when I look back how each chapter, no matter how dark, was necessary for me to understand the beauty of the life I have now. I think about the 12-year-old girl I once was, the one who trembled in fear, who had her arms forced away from her newborn, and who thought the world had abandoned her. She had no strength, no protection, no one to rely on. And yet, even in that absolute darkness, a seed of resilience was planted inside me, a quiet flame that never extinguished, no matter how cruelly my father and brother tried to snuff it out. That flame, my dears, was the love for the child I had been forced to leave behind. It was that love that carried me through the sleepless nights, the backbreaking labor, and the endless years of humiliation and poverty. Each moment of suffering, each insult, each day spent working from sunrise to sunset under the oppressive gaze of Gerald and Bobby only strengthened my determination, even if I did not yet fully realize it. I think now that every hardship prepared me for the day I would finally meet my son again, not as a helpless baby, but as a man of integrity, power, and love. The universe, in its strange and mysterious way, had been preparing both of us for that reunion for decades. Living here in Meridian, in my little house with the garden I tend every morning, I have discovered a simple joy that I never thought I would experience in my youth. The soil in my hands, the smell of fresh herbs, the sight of vegetables growing slowly and steadily, it all feels like life affirming itself in ways I can touch, nurture, and see. Every plant I care for reminds me of the life I survived, the life I reclaimed, and the life I continue to build. There is a rhythm to this work, a healing rhythm, a reminder that growth takes time, patience, and persistence, just like my own journey. Even the smallest successes in the garden, a tomato ripening to red perfection, a sprig of basil unfurling in the morning sun, fill me with profound gratitude and a sense of accomplishment that was denied to me for so many years. And yet, the joy of these quiet, peaceful days is inseparable from the love and presence of my family. Robert visits regularly, his children laughing and running through my yard, asking questions about the plants, about life, about me. Marina, with her sharp mind and caring heart, often sits beside me on the porch as we talk about the past, the present, and the future. Daniel brings news of his young family, stories of children playing and learning, stories that make my heart swell with pride and tenderness. And little Peter and Sophia, my grandchildren, teach me daily that innocence and curiosity are not lost even as the world can sometimes be cruel. They remind me to see life through a lens of wonder. I feel a connection to them that stretches beyond the bounds of biology, beyond the years of separation and hardship. I see my son in them. I see his love, his kindness, and his strength reflected in every question they ask, every smile they give. Living with this knowledge that I am loved and protected, that my life now belongs to me in ways it never did before, has allowed me to let go of the bitterness that once consumed me. I do not wake with fear, I do not go to bed with anxiety, and I do not live in dread of the cruelty of others. Those years of suffering have not been erased, they are etched into my soul, but they no longer define me. Instead, they serve as reminders of how far I have come, of how resilient the human spirit can be, and of how powerful a mother's love remains, even when it is tested beyond measure. Sometimes I think about the day Robert arrived, the day the black car pulled up in front of the old house, and the flood of emotions that consumed me when I realized that my son had not only survived, but had grown into a man who could restore my life entirely. The anger I had felt toward my father and brother still exists, but it has softened. I have learned that resentment, though understandable, is a weight that prevents growth. I have forgiven them, not because they deserved it, but because I deserve peace. I cannot change what they did, but I can choose how their actions will impact the remainder of my life. Choosing forgiveness, choosing to focus on love and gratitude, has been a lesson that even decades of pain could not have taught me without the crucible of experience. Every morning, as the sun rises over my little home, I feel the miracle of the life I have been granted. I see the beauty in the mundane, the coffee I sip on the porch, the gentle chatter of neighbors passing by, the sun shining on my garden, the smell of fresh herbs, the laughter of my grandchildren echoing in the yard. These simple joys, often overlooked by those who rush through life, are for me treasures beyond measure. I have discovered that after years of deprivation and sorrow, it is these ordinary moments that hold the most extraordinary power, the power to heal, to comfort, and to affirm that life, even after tremendous loss, can be beautiful. I also find myself reflecting on the incredible journey Robert took to find me, the determination he displayed, and the kindness of the man who raised him, Mr. Jackson. How miraculous it was that despite his own hardships, despite growing up without knowledge of his mother, he never gave up on the quest to understand his origins. And when he found me, he did not seek vengeance or punishment, but instead chose to restore love, dignity, and security. The reunion was not only miraculous, it was transformative. It reshaped the remainder of my life, proving that courage, persistence, and love can indeed overcome decades of separation and suffering. Life has a way of teaching lessons slowly, often painfully, but the rewards, when they come, are profound. I have learned that even in the darkest times, hope is not an illusion, it is a lifeline. That a mother's love cannot be destroyed, no matter the obstacles. That justice, though delayed, can arrive in forms more beautiful than revenge. And that life, in its most miraculous moments, can restore not only what was lost, but what we never imagined we could regain. Now, as I sit in the quiet of my garden with the smell of herbs in the air, the laughter of grandchildren in the distance, and the warmth of a life finally reclaimed, I understand the full meaning of resilience. I understand that every hardship, every sorrow, and every tear has contributed to the woman I have become. And I understand, most profoundly, that the love I carried in my heart for 30 years was never in vain. It waited quietly but powerfully for the moment when it could be restored, reunited, and celebrated. I am no longer the girl who trembled in fear, no longer the woman forced into helpless obedience. I am a mother, a grandmother, and a survivor who has been blessed with a second chance. And every day, in every moment of laughter, peace, and love, I am reminded that life's greatest miracles often arrive not in the ways we expect, but in the ways we need most. Even now, decades after the storm of my past, I often find myself watching my grandchildren play in the garden, their laughter ringing through the yard like the sweetest music. Every time I see Peter chasing after a butterfly, or Sophia helping me water the tomato plants, I am reminded of what life can give when it chooses to heal the wounds we carry. These children, innocent and full of curiosity, are living proof that love, patience, and care can overcome even the most unimaginable hardships. It's astonishing to me that the little boy I once cradled, whose cries I was forced to abandon in the dark of a vacant lot, could grow into a man who not only found me but created a life filled with love for others. Seeing Robert now as a father, husband, and provider, I cannot help but marvel at the incredible journey fate allowed him to undertake. There are days when the past visits me with an unexpected sharpness. Sometimes a memory sneaks in, a brief image of that night when I had to leave him, and my heart tightens as if it were happening all over again. But those moments no longer define me. They remind me of the strength I found within myself, the courage I summoned to survive, and the resilience that allowed me to endure years of suffering. And more than anything, they remind me of how extraordinary it is that love, even when tested by cruelty and abandonment, never truly fades. It waits, it grows quietly, and when the time is right, it can return with a power and beauty that defies every expectation. I have learned to cherish these quiet, ordinary moments with my grandchildren because they are filled with extraordinary significance. Every time Marina asks me to tell her the story of the little girl who once had to abandon her baby, I tell it honestly, without shame, without fear. I explain that life sometimes places impossible burdens on us, and that the decisions we are forced to make do not define our hearts or our capacity for love. I tell her that even when the world seems cruel and unforgiving, miracles can happen, and hope should never be abandoned. These conversations, simple as they may seem, are a bridge between generations, a reminder that the lessons of resilience, patience, and unconditional love must continue to be passed down. Robert's presence in my life is a daily blessing. He has never allowed me to forget the child I once was, the suffering I endured, or the courage I found to survive. But more importantly, he has shown me that even in the harshest circumstances, life can be rewritten. Watching him interact with his children, seeing the tenderness in his voice and the warmth in his actions, I feel a deep sense of pride that is difficult to put into words. He took a childhood filled with uncertainty, abandonment, and struggle, and transformed it into a life of purpose, compassion, and achievement. It is proof that the human spirit, guided by love and determination, can overcome even the deepest scars. Sometimes, when the garden is quiet and the sun begins to set, I think about the strange, miraculous ways in which life arranges itself. The very soil I cultivate, the plants I nurture, the children who play in my yard, they are all part of a tapestry woven from threads of suffering, survival, and unexpected joy. It makes me realize that even when the present seems hopeless, there are unseen forces shaping the future, moments of grace waiting to arrive at the right time. That vacant lot where I once left my son, which felt like the end of my world, became the starting point for a story of reunion, love, and transformation that spans decades. And that, my dears, is a lesson I hope everyone who hears my story will carry with them. Even the most broken beginnings can lead to miraculous endings. I often think about the people who played a role in our story without ever knowing the magnitude of their actions. Mr. Jackson, the kind man who found Robert in the trash and raised him as his own, is a figure I can never forget. His love, guidance, and commitment to Robert's well being were the foundation upon which all the miracles in our lives were built. Without him, my son might have grown up alone, bitter, or lost. His selflessness reminds me that even small acts of kindness can ripple through time, altering lives in ways we cannot imagine. It is a powerful reminder that humanity, at its best, has the ability to create miracles, sometimes in the most unexpected circumstances. Even now, at 74, I continue to find new joys in life. The garden teaches me patience, the grandchildren teach me wonder, and Robert teaches me the enduring power of love and family. Life, I have learned, is not measured solely by suffering or loss, but by the moments of connection, gratitude, and growth that we experience along the way. Each day, I wake up with a sense of purpose, knowing that I am surrounded by love, that I have been given a second chance at life, and that the legacy of resilience and hope I leave behind will endure through my children and grandchildren. Looking back, I realize that the pain I endured, as unbearable as it seemed at the time, has become the soil from which the most extraordinary blessings of my life have grown. Every tear, every sleepless night, every insult and humiliation I endured prepared me to recognize and cherish the miracle of reunion when it finally arrived. And I understand now that life's most profound lessons are often hidden within the trials we least want to face. They demand patience, courage, and faith, and when we survive them, they reward us with a richness of experience that cannot be replicated or replaced. Even the act of simply sitting on my porch, listening to the wind rustle through the leaves and watching the children run freely, is a reminder that life has a rhythm, a way of balancing loss and gain, despair and hope, cruelty and kindness. The vacant lot where I left my child so many years ago is now long gone, replaced by a small market. But the echoes of that moment, the pain, and the enduring love I carried through decades, remain etched in my heart. And yet in their place has grown a life of fulfillment, love, and unshakable peace, a life I had once thought impossible. Sometimes I catch myself smiling at the thought that those years of suffering, those dark and lonely days, were not wasted. They taught me strength, patience, and the invincible power of a mother's love. And now, when I see Robert succeed, when I watch my grandchildren thrive, when I tend my garden in the quiet of the morning, I feel a profound sense of accomplishment. Not just for what I have achieved, but for having survived, for having loved despite the odds, and for having been given a chance to experience a life filled with joy after decades of unimaginable hardship. This story of mine, my dears, is not just about loss and reunion. It is about resilience, faith, and the enduring power of love. It is about believing, even when all evidence suggests otherwise, that life has a way of setting things right, that justice may be delayed, but it can arrive in forms more magnificent than we imagine. And it is about understanding that even when the world seems cruel, love never abandons us. It waits quietly until the right moment to reveal its transformative power. I have spent a lifetime learning these truths, and each day reinforces them in ways both small and profound. From the simple pleasure of planting seeds in the garden to watching my grandchildren laugh to the moments of quiet reflection at sunset, I am constantly reminded that life, with all its trials, is capable of giving back tenfold when we least expect it. And that, my dears, is the miracle I have lived to witness. That even after 30 years of separation, pain, and longing, love finds its way, and life has a way of restoring what was once thought lost forever. Even after all the joy and security that Robert brought into my life, I realized that a part of my heart was still weighed down by the shadows of the past. The faces of Gerald and Bobby, the fear, the pain, the humiliation, they haunted me in quiet moments, whispering doubts, reminding me of the helpless girl I once was. But over time, I understood something crucial. To fully embrace the life I had been given, I needed to confront those shadows, not with anger, but with understanding and ultimately forgiveness. Not for their sake, my dears, but for mine. Holding on to bitterness would only chain me to the past I had long outgrown. I had survived 30 years of pain. I owed it to myself to step into the light that had finally returned to me. Sitting in my little garden, watching my tomatoes ripen and my herbs grow tall, I often reflected on the strange, twisting ways of fate. How could a girl forced to abandon her newborn, living under tyranny in her own home, end up here? How could a woman who once felt hopeless and invisible find herself surrounded by a loving son, grandchildren who adored her, and a life filled with peace? And then I realized it was not magic, though it felt like it. It was endurance, patience, and the unbreakable bond between mother and child. It was the quiet, invisible love that had never left me, that had guided Robert to me, that had finally allowed me to reclaim what was taken from me decades ago. And forgiveness, my dears, became a strange but beautiful companion. When Gerald and Bobby passed away, lonely and forgotten, I felt no joy, no satisfaction in their demise. What I felt was relief. Relief that I was no longer tied to their cruelty, that their shadows could no longer darken my days, that I was free to live without fear, without resentment controlling my life. I forgave not because they deserved it, but because I deserved to breathe, to move forward without dragging the weight of hatred through my remaining years. And that act of letting go, of forgiving, even silently, released a peace that had long eluded me. It was a freedom I had never known as a young girl, chained to the whims of two cruel men, but now, finally, it was mine. Watching Robert with his children, seeing the love he poured into their lives, reminded me that our story was not defined by the cruelty we had endured, but by the love that survived it. Every laugh, every hug, every simple gesture of kindness in this household felt like a victory over the suffering of the past. And yet, I also understood the responsibility of legacy. I wanted my grandchildren to understand the depth of resilience, the power of compassion, and the strength found in perseverance. I wanted them to know that even when life seems unfair, when injustice seems insurmountable, there is always a path to healing if we hold on to courage and love. Robert and I often sit on the porch together in the evenings, sipping tea and talking about life, and he always reminds me, Mom, your story is our story. It teaches us who we are, where we come from, and the strength that lives in our blood. I never thought my tale, one filled with suffering and heartbreak, could become a source of guidance and inspiration for the next generation. But it has taught them empathy, the importance of kindness, and the value of standing up for what is right, even when the world seems against you. There were moments when I feared I had missed my chance to reconnect with Robert, to experience the joy of motherhood, and even the simple pleasure of being safe and loved. But life, in its quiet and miraculous way, reminded me that timing is everything, that even when doors seem closed, windows open elsewhere, that even after 30 long years of separation, the bond between a mother and her child remains unbroken, resilient, and waiting to be reunited. The first time Robert held my hand in Jackson, looking me in the eye and telling me he had never stopped searching for me, I knew that love had endured far beyond human comprehension. And that knowledge, that unwavering certainty, became my anchor, guiding me through the uncertainties that remained. I have learned, my dears, that forgiveness and healing are intertwined, that to forgive is not to forget, but to reclaim your power. To forgive is not to excuse cruelty, but to release yourself from its chains. And to heal is to understand that your story, no matter how painful, has value, that even the darkest chapters can lead to the brightest moments if you have the courage to survive them and the patience to wait for life's justice. Now, when I look at my grandchildren, I see the future, the hope, the promise of life unburdened by fear or resentment. I watch Peter carefully tending a young sapling, Sophia carefully arranging flowers in a vase, and I think of the young mother I once was, terrified and powerless, and I marvel at how far we have come. I see the love of a mother surviving against all odds, finding its way back even after decades, and it fills me with a joy so deep I can scarcely put it into words. It is a joy tempered by experience but unshakable in its strength, a joy born from enduring the impossible and discovering that miracles indeed are real. And I often reflect on the lessons Robert has taught me, not as a son, but as a man of integrity and compassion. That intelligence, perseverance, and moral courage can change lives. That kindness, extended even in small measures, can ripple through time, creating effects we may never fully understand. That life's injustices, while painful, can be countered with dedication, love, and the unwavering commitment to do what is right. Through Robert's actions, I see how one person's determination can rewrite history, heal old wounds, and restore what was once thought lost forever. The little house I now call my own, with its flourishing garden and quiet neighborhood, is more than just a home. It is a symbol of resilience. Every plant I nurture, every meal I prepare, every moment spent watching my grandchildren laugh is a testament to the triumph of love and endurance over cruelty and despair. 30 years ago, I could not have imagined this life. 30 years ago, I could not have imagined that the boy I left behind would return, transformed to offer protection, love, and the fulfillment of dreams I had thought forever out of reach. And yet, here we are, living proof that life has a way of balancing its scales, of correcting its course, and of delivering blessings that defy logic and expectation. Even the simplest acts, like sharing a cup of tea with Robert in the evening, become sacred moments. Every conversation about the past, every story we recount, is not just a recollection, but a celebration of survival, of endurance, of love that never abandoned us. And as I look at the faces of my grandchildren, I am filled with gratitude, not only for what I have received, but for the lessons that suffering taught me and the depth of the love that sustained me through the darkest times. My life today, my dears, is a testament to the incredible resilience of the human spirit, the unbreakable bond between a mother and child, and the miraculous ways in which love can return to heal old wounds. 30 years of separation, pain, and longing culminated not in despair, but in the profound joy of reunion, the peace of forgiveness, and the enduring power of family. It is a story of tragedy transformed into triumph, of darkness turned to light, and of a life reborn from the ashes of suffering. And so, as I sit here on my porch, tending my garden, listening to the laughter of my grandchildren, and feeling the unwavering love of Robert beside me, I finally understand the truth that has carried me through decades. Love never dies, time may separate it, cruelty may challenge it, and life may test it in unimaginable ways, but true love endures. And when the moment is right, it returns, stronger and more magnificent than we could ever hope to imagine. Even now, as I recount my story, my hands tremble not from fear, but from the weight of everything I have lived through. 30 years of waiting, hoping, fearing, and praying, and yet the moment of reunion was not what I could have ever imagined. It was more beautiful, more overwhelming, more miraculous than any dream I could have conjured. That knock on my door, Robert standing there in his dark suit with that penetrating gaze, was more than just a reunion. It was a moment that tore away decades of pain and replaced it with a truth so powerful it shook me to my very core. It reminded me that life, no matter how cruel, has a strange and wondrous way of balancing itself, of delivering justice, of creating miracles where none seem possible. I think often of the young girl I was, forced to abandon her baby in the dead of night, trembling, weak, and powerless, surrounded by men who were meant to protect her but instead became her oppressors. That little girl would never have imagined that the child she left behind could grow to become a man capable of rewriting her destiny. And yet, that is exactly what happened. Robert's arrival, his unwavering determination to find me, and the life he built for both of us reminded me that love is stronger than fear, stronger than cruelty, stronger than the passage of time. It is eternal, unyielding, and capable of overcoming the most impossible odds. Even now, when I look at my grandchildren, I feel a sense of awe and gratitude that is difficult to put into words. Peter, Sophia, and Daniel, each one a living testament to the power of survival, resilience, and love. Every laugh, every smile, every little hand reaching for mine is a reminder that life, no matter how much it tests us, always offers a chance to heal, to grow, and to create joy where once there was only despair. I watched them with tears in my eyes, knowing that the suffering of the past, the pain I endured, was never in vain. It was preparing me for this life, this family, this peace that I had once thought forever out of reach. Robert often reminds me that the journey of life is rarely straight, rarely fair, but it is always meaningful. Mom, he says, every hardship, every tear, every lonely night you endured, it all led to this moment. You survived, and in surviving, you taught me, and now my children, the power of perseverance and love. And he is right. Every trial, every tear, every sleepless night was a seed that blossomed into a miracle, a life reclaimed, a bond restored, a family reunited. I remember lying in my little bed in Meridian at night, long after the days of despair were over, feeling the peace that comes from knowing you are safe, loved, and valued. I think of the young girl I once was, trembling and broken, and I whisper to her across time, You did it. You survived. You held on to love even when it was taken from you, and now your life is filled with the joy you deserve. That small act of self recognition, of acknowledging the strength it took to endure, became a cornerstone of my happiness. I had faced the impossible and emerged whole, not because the world was kind, but because love and courage are stronger than any force that seeks to destroy them. 30 years ago, I could not have imagined this life. I could not have imagined the joy of being Robert's mother in adulthood, of living in a house filled with laughter, love, and security, of being able to tend my garden, welcome friends, and watch my grandchildren grow. I could not have imagined the peace that now fills my days or the profound gratitude that fills my heart. And yet here I am. Life has given me everything I had longed for in ways I never could have expected, and the lessons I learned along the way are priceless. I want to speak finally of hope, real, enduring hope. Hope that does not depend on immediate relief or instant justice, but on the quiet belief that life, in its own time, has a way of setting things right. Hope that teaches us to survive the darkest nights, knowing that dawn always comes. Hope that reminds us that love, even when separated by years and cruelty, can endure, can guide, and can return to heal old wounds. And hope that assures us that miracles, no matter how improbable, can and do happen when least expected. Looking back, I see now that my suffering was not meaningless. Every hardship, every humiliation, every tear shed alone was part of a larger story, a story that would lead me to joy, to family, to love restored. Life, with all its twists and turns, with all its cruelty and its unexpected grace, had a plan, even if I could not see it at the time. And the most beautiful part is that we, as humans, are capable of enduring, of waiting, and of embracing the miracles that life holds for us, even after decades of despair. Robert's love, his unwavering commitment, and the life he built for us together became the proof that the bond between mother and child is unbreakable. Time may separate it, cruelty may test it, and the world may attempt to silence it, but that love will find its way, as mine did, back into the arms of the one it belongs to. It is a force stronger than fear, stronger than injustice, stronger than anything we can imagine. And when it returns, it transforms everything it touches, creating beauty, joy, and peace where once there was only sorrow. As I sit in my garden now, surrounded by the fruits of my labor, the laughter of my grandchildren, and the steady, reassuring presence of Robert, I realize that life's greatest miracles often come in unexpected forms. They come after trials that seem insurmountable, after heartbreak that seems eternal, and after hope seems lost. And yet they arrive quietly, steadily, inevitably, reminding us that love endures, that justice prevails, and that life, in all its complexity, can be wondrous beyond our imagining. I have lived through despair, endured injustice, and faced the impossible. I have known fear, helplessness, and loss. And yet here I am, a woman transformed, surrounded by love, security, and the fulfillment of a life once stolen from me. 30 years of separation, pain, and longing were finally erased by the miracle of reunion, the power of love, and the endurance of hope. My story, my dears, is proof that no matter how dark the night, the dawn always comes, and it brings with it the possibility of miracles, redemption, and the restoration of everything we hold dear. And so, as I look at the horizon from my porch, feeling the warmth of the sun on my face and the laughter of my grandchildren in the air, I finally understand the lesson that life has taught me through decades of suffering. Never give up, never stop hoping, and never forget that love, no matter how tested, always finds its way home. That knock on my door 30 years after my heartbreak changed everything. It was the moment life reminded me that miracles are real, that love endures, and that the bonds we hold in our hearts can never truly be broken. And for that, my dears, I will be grateful for the rest of my days. I remember the first morning after Robert brought me to his home in Jackson. I woke up in a bed that was not just a bed, it was a symbol of safety, comfort, and dignity. For the first time in decades, I did not wake up to fear, to the weight of oppression, to the ache in my body and soul. I woke up to the warmth of sunlight spilling through large windows, to the laughter of children in the distance, and to a quiet that promised peace instead of danger. That morning, I realized something profound. The life I had once dreamed of, the life I had thought was lost forever, had returned to me, not as a fantasy, not as a fleeting hope, but as a living, breathing reality. I often think about the girl I once was, 12 years old, fragile, trembling, and forced to abandon her newborn baby. I think about the helplessness, the despair, the the crushing weight of being trapped in a house with men who should have protected me but instead became my tormentors. That young girl could not have imagined the future she would have, could not have imagined the strength she would someday discover within herself, nor the miracles that life would deliver. And yet here I am, a 74-year-old woman, surrounded by love, family, and the simple joys of life, a living testament to resilience, to endurance, and to the power of hope. Robert's love and determination taught me that the bonds of family are unbreakable, even when separated by time, distance, and cruelty. The bond between a mother and her child is not defined by the days you hold them in your arms, but by the love that lives in your heart, a love that endures, waits, and eventually triumphs. That love carried me through 20 years of unimaginable pain, and it brought him back to me, stronger, wiser, and determined to restore everything that had been taken. I could feel it in his eyes, in his words, in the way he took my hand that first day and never let go. He carried the weight of our shared past, and in doing so, he healed me in ways I had long believed impossible. Life has a way of teaching us lessons that are often painful, even unbearable, but ultimately transformative. I learned that courage is not the absence of fear, it is the willingness to act in spite of it. I learned that resilience is not just surviving, it is surviving with the hope that something better awaits. I learned that even in the darkest moments when despair feels endless, the possibility of redemption, reunion, and joy remains. That morning, surrounded by sunlight, warmth, and the quiet hum of life around me, I understood these lessons in the deepest part of my soul. The garden I tend now, the simple joys of growing tomatoes, lettuce, and herbs, the laughter of my grandchildren, the quiet afternoons with friends, the comfort of my little house, it all represents the victory of life over despair. Every leaf, every bloom, every smile is a testament to the fact that we are capable of enduring, surviving, and ultimately thriving. The life I lead now is not just the result of luck or chance. It is the result of patience, perseverance, and an unyielding belief that love, no matter how long it is withheld, always finds its way back. When I reflect on those 20 years of suffering, I do not feel bitterness anymore. I do not dwell on the cruelty of my father and brother, nor on the tears shed in the silence of my bed. Instead, I feel gratitude for the lessons, for the strength I discovered within myself, for the ability to endure, and most importantly, for the miracle of Robert returning to me. Life taught me that every hardship can sow the seeds of future joy, that every trial can prepare us for the happiness that is yet to come. And sometimes, just when we think all is lost, life delivers a miracle so profound that it changes everything. I often sit on my porch, looking at the garden, listening to the wind rustling through the trees, and I feel an overwhelming sense of peace. I think of the young mother I once was, of the child I had to leave behind, and of the miraculous journey that led to our reunion. I see Robert in my mind, the boy found in a trash-strewn lot, growing up to be the man who restored my life, and I marvel at the incredible way life unfolds. Every tear, every heartbreak, every lonely night was preparing me for this moment, preparing me for the life I live now, a life filled with love, family, and hope. And so, my dears, the greatest lesson I can share from my story is this. Never give up on love, never give up on hope, and never give up on life, no matter how dark it may seem. The impossible can become possible, the lost can be found, and the broken can be healed. Miracles do happen, and they often arrive when we least expect them. My son returned to me not as a helpless child, but as a strong, determined, and loving man, proving that love endures beyond time, beyond suffering, beyond all odds. As I close my eyes at night, listening to the quiet of my home, the soft breathing of my grandchildren, and the distant hum of life, I am filled with gratitude. Gratitude for the life I have now, for the son who came back to me, for the family that surrounds me, and for the incredible journey that taught me the power of resilience and love. I am living proof that life has a way of righting itself, that the bonds of love cannot be broken, and that miracles, no matter how long they take, are always possible. And so my story ends not with sorrow, but with hope, joy, and the unshakable belief that no matter how dark the night, the dawn will come. Love will return, life will heal. And the miracles we hope for, even after decades of waiting, will find us when the time is right. That knock on my door 30 years ago changed everything, and it reminded me in the most profound way that love, courage, and hope are the greatest forces in the universe, capable of transforming even the deepest pain into the most extraordinary joy.